we gonna first do Matt and Amy's and Dana division, or?
I think we were gonna start with the
again?
vision
Let's
piece, so I told them they might be on deck for a period of time.
Okay.
They're all right with that.
go.
Wherever
Larry,
Matt
I'll
went.
turn it over to you then.
Thanks. I mean, it's a pressure on me to keep this moving, so you aren't waiting to your piece, so I'll do my best there. Thanks for the opportunity. I would ask you just a statement or sentence or two from each of you. What are your best hopes for tonight? And I'm checking that against what I had on my list from my planning call with Tina, Lori, and Steve. But it's your work session. I'm here to help you, not my work session, so I'll adapt as needed. So your best hopes for tonight. When we walk out of here, and thank you for investing another evening of your time on behalf of the kids in the district. What are you hoping for tonight? Your best hopes, statement or two.
I hope that we're all trying to point our boat in the right direction. We've talked in the past about steering that boat's tough and turning it's even tougher, and hopefully we're not all trying to yank the boat in different directions. So that's what I'm hoping for, is we got the same end point in mind.
Thank you. Thanks, Sean. Somebody else?
A picture of success that we all can agree to and feel and relate to emotionally, so that we see that picture of success that helps us create priorities, strategies and priorities, and allows alignment for all the work that we're doing.
Yeah, and I'd like that to be kind of the big picture stuff, and hopefully, have the big vision of what we want to see, and I hope we walk out of here kind of excited about that. And, it's hard at these, 6 o'clock at night to get excited about much.
Yeah.
But it would be nice if this was an energetic conversation.
And it ought to be. And if you walk out of here feeling like this was an endurance piece, then not good for us and shame on me. So, good. Somebody else. Thank you.
Something I hope to walk out that we have a vision that continues to move the progress of the district forward and not necessarily taking us a few steps backwards.
So the idea of moving forward without throwing out the baby with the bathwater, that kind of thing? Uh-huh. All right. Paul, Phil, your best hopes?
Go ahead, Paul.
Well, I'm in agreement with most of what everyone says. I just hope that our vision is also something that we can actually realize. It's not too far out. It's within the scope of our district and what we're faced with here.
I go along with that. I go along with everything that's said, and I hope our vision includes something for all students at all levels.
Great. Lori?
I'm hoping that we will come up with a path, kind of a plan of what we want to do, and I don't know if we'll get as detailed as how we're going to get there, but perhaps.
And part of that'll be, that's the built-in motivation for you all. I'll keep moving forward, keep this as energized as we can, but that'll depend, how deep you want to go on some things, and if some pieces take longer than the other, we'll get as far as we can. Steve? Your best hopes.
Well, I know that everyone knows we've got 5 collective years of experience in here, so we're kind of boarding the bus as it's in full speed down the highway there. So I'm hoping it's an opportunity for us to reaffirm the direction that we're moving, and if we need to make some course adjustments, that we can plot those out so that we know that the bus is at full speed, and want to make sure that we've got the ability to make the turns necessary.
Great. And you two have invested some time tonight. What are your best hopes? From a little different vantage point, what are you hoping for?
I'm excited to share with the board how we have aligned our arrows to the current strategic plan and inform them so that they feel good about those pieces that are in place and be able to ask questions so that we can continue to refine what we're doing and understand their hopes and expectations.
Yeah, the alignment word it comes up everywhere. It's always about implementation and alignment. You can have all the dreams you want, but if you can't align things to actually deliver. That's the great fall down. Matt, how about for you?
Yeah, I think the last word Amy said there is what I was thinking about the expectations piece. I think, we want to make sure that we're fulfilling those expectations and being able to deliver on the vision that the board sets. And so I think we're more successful at doing that if we're clear on what those are and, what we should be leading the organization back on our side with.
Good. We'll do our best in this time frame to deliver on the kinds of things that you've mentioned, and that's my one other statement. I applaud you guys for, again, it's one more night, I get that, but highest compliment for me that you carve out 2-3 hours to do this work, because those of you who are new on the board already can see how time gets gobbled up and used just on the month-to-month business kinds of things that happen. That buys for time pretty heavily. And so as I've worked with boards the last 17 years, I know you're probably wondering, how does a 37-year-old guy work with boards for 17 years, right? Anyway, that's the boards that carve out the time and have the conversation. Most are able to gather some momentum and move forward in different ways than boards that don't take the time. It's not always, but it's a heck of a good starting piece. And Kristen, thanks for your help tonight. There was going to be from my end, there'll be very little technology. We'll look at a video clip and a couple of slides around the strategies, but beyond that, our job is to squeeze every inch out of the talk time that we can tonight. And then I'll follow up in the next couple of weeks and send a draft set of notes around which you can work from and keep moving forward. So just please invest your time in talking and listening and paint that clear picture. So I was telling my wife over the weekend, we're going to start on the left-hand side of your folder. There aren't even a ton of materials in there because, again, I want to squeeze the talk time out of you. Tell my wife, I said, I sent this little one-pager by John Cotter, and you don't have to work in vision very long before you, his name comes up all over with Collins and others. The interesting thing, John Cotter's retired right now, but his work still sticks. And while a lot of his work is around business corporations, the application to organizations is pretty good, common sense, strong stuff. Good work. And so in sending this to you, there are really 3 things, quick, simple things. So you might have laughed and said, we're going to spend an evening with a guy who sends this to us. And I come back to his 3 overarching lessons. Avoid those mandates and decrees. When you want to create, you said that tonight. We want something that's got some energy that folks can get around and see themselves attaching to, and be invested in it. And mandates or decrees don't do that. And then the other end of the spectrum, from just mandate and hands off, is way down in the weeds and micromanaging and way down in the minutia. And so for any leadership group, if you get stuck in either camp, you shortchange the process. How do teachers, how do community members, how are others supposed to attach and buy in and climb on board if you've prescribed, right? If leaders have prescribed all the steps how to get there and are constantly looking over the shoulder about that, or just expect by publishing this, everybody's going to get jacked up and jump on board. So trying to navigate that through, and that's the story of the apples. In a short couple sentences, it paints a pretty clear picture. Here's the advantage. Come with me. Invites folks to move over to the other tree. Your takeaways from this quick little piece. Again, this is not rocket science. A couple of us were talking before you convened about there are different models. There's no one way to do this. The experts are after some of the same tenets, but there's at least a half dozen or a dozen or more kind of ways or formats, structures to define a vision. Anything you'd want to add in terms of kind of where we're headed on that journey? Okay, then one other quick document, and then we'll start talking. You can pull out on the left side the kind of the buff-colored one, the 3 ingredients of planning process, and the blue sheet. So on the buff document, we we put this together at the School Board Association, and we drew on the names, Cotter, Collins, others, et cetera. And I just want to circle in for a minute on page 2, that mission and vision. It was interesting when I think Rathina first contacted me around and commented about the vision piece, and I've reread your mission statement about 15 times in the last week. And I kind of look at it, something I'm going to put out there tonight. It strikes me that the second part of it really has a lot of vision chunks in it. And you may already have some vision work already from in the past started, and look at it with that lens and add to it, decide to set it aside. But mission and vision, the mission, why do we exist? Why do you have the school district? And the vision element, given that mission, why do we exist? What direction are we headed? What do we, and you, several of you mentioned, how are we going to make a difference for kids as a school system? So that's where we'll focus more heavily. A couple of you that mentioned on page 3 the goals, and you start to get into strategies that accompany that. We'll see how far we get. But we ought to have enough of a structure that you can continue to work on or pick it up from there. On your own, give me a holler, whatever. I'm not trying to slow this down and come back. It'll be just how far we can get. So but we'll draw back on this document. So, next piece, the blue sheet. And circle or highlight, in the upper left, I want you to imagine it's November 2030. It's 13 years from now. And just follow along with this piece and we'll break into groups. But imagine in 13 years that the Iowa City Community School District has been recognized in a national research journal for being a district that has positively influenced student learning in ways seldom achieved by large school systems. The journal studied the impact of school districts across the country over the past year and identified Iowa City Community School District as one of 5 school systems where the district mission and vision have become a reality for virtually all students. So Phil, you mentioned all kids, touching all kids. Imagine that your mission and vision is reaching all kids. The article concluded, it has been an amazing story to learn how the school district transformed itself to best meet the needs of all students and prepare children to succeed in whatever pathways they choose to pursue after graduation. So I'd ask you this, take a couple of minutes individually and just describe, short version's better, 3 specific observable things. And so again, we're in 2030, and now you're looking backward, having received this recognition over the prior 10 plus years. What are 3 specific observable things the district can point to with pride that either are happening or would have happened between now and 2030? What would those 3 big observable things be? What would put you as a top district nationwide? no method to the madness other than I pulled out your names Friday and tried to get a blend, and we'll work in 2 or 3 different small groups tonight, but tried to get a blend, at least a couple of board members or veteran suit plus a couple of new ones, and also mix it up so you got new faces to see over the course of the night. But Amy and Matt have graciously been voluntold and said they'd be willing to be reporters. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. One group can go down, we'll get the lights on and work at that table. One group can stay here, and just around the table, share your 3 ideas. Listen for commonalities. They'll get them captured on chart paper. And then after you've done that, then I'd like you to revisit and ask yourselves, after you've looked at any commonalities, and you may be grouping some things similar, then push yourselves, what would be the top 3 items as a small group? And we'll see what we get between both tables together, okay? So first group with Amy down there, Paul, Sean, Lori, and JP. You guys work at that table. And then Steve, Ruthina, Phil, and Janet, go ahead and work at this area. And Matt will be recording for you guys, and I'll be wandering back and forth in just a minute. Thanks. Here's a couple of pieces of paper here, so you can use the easel if you want anyway.
Can just put right up on the.
You sure can.
Right up there.
Perfect. Here's a different as you do. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, can we-
Yeah, that's the,
So it's gonna be a problem with my handwriting because every educator has a best story in education and then their worst moment in education. Mine was in 2nd grade when my 2nd grade teacher embarrassed me for how I held my pencil, and so my handwriting's always been poor. So you'll get entertained with my chicken scratches.
As long as you can read it.
I can usually read it.
Okay.
That's usually okay. I'm just not sure anybody else can. So.
if you can, we'll roll Kristen in to take the place.
All right. So,
I have faith in you, Matt. You
All
can
right.
do it.
just learn how to keep going.
Yep, just learn.
Want mine to close the achievement gap, and I'm being a little generous, by at least over 50% between Black and brown students and their peers, white peers, obviously.
My first one was around personalized learning experiences tailored to students' interests and passions.
Keep waiting for the chicken scratch.
I know, that's you.
No, this is, I'm talking about, I should be writing, then you'll see chicken scratch.
Personalized learning experiences.
Tailored to students' interests and passions.
Phil, you got one?
Yes, provide opportunities for all students to be successful, whether they choose a course of college or career field.
Right, try to be as little less wordy as I can, because this is what I wrote down, but you don't want to write that down. So how about
Summarize.
integrating career and academic development, so kind of springboarding off what Phil just said.
No matter what the state ever does, there's never university, no matter.
We're getting bundling.
Right.
Bundling.
Yeah, no, because one of mine, I guess, sort of attached to both of theirs, and it, but it was more specific.
truly they've been.
focused on partnering with local businesses and other resources to offer a robust career tech program.
Mhm.
And my issue with that is, you can always say, oh, there's not enough, right? And I think that those are, we haven't had some of our priorities set.
My second one was kind of in this vein around hands-on real-world projects in partnership with, yeah, you could just put a check mark next to the partnership ones. I think it's along those
Yeah.
lines. The project-based real-world.
I had one that was very similar too, as I was jotting it down, and said something about all students can articulate a plan or a path to pursue post-graduation. And I kind of just scribbled like something more specific than just saying college or work. What is that actual specific thing I'm going to go do when I leave? And it may change, right? But they should have a pretty good idea, refined about what they're interested in, what they'd like to pursue.
And I'd expanded on that, saying, okay, for kids to really understand that, they need to do job shadowing, they need to do internships, and they need to have access to apprenticeships so that they've got kind of that full continuum that they can try out while they're still in school.
So
I don't know if you have to write that down, but I just saw it being that deep so that,
The only other thing that fits in with that is they say 40% of the jobs in the next 20 to 30 years haven't even been invented.
right.
So it's a skill set.
So
to-
it's still providing a well-rounded human that
Yep.
can adapt and go into whatever they choose.
Yeah.
My second one was very similar to Ruthina's, but mine was that the word achievement gap is gone from our vocabulary. And that we essentially are referring to students as students. We don't pigeonhole kids into, this is what our black students are. We look at all students and all students perform
At a high level.
equally.
High levels, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
that the achievement gap is no longer a word that we use.
Springboarding off that, I also had that the access gap was gone, that we don't have some classes for some kids and some classes for other kids, but that all students have access to the full curriculum, so that whether they're planning on going into the service or an apprenticeship or Kirkwood or 2 or 4 year college or a university, wherever they're going, that they've all had access to robust curriculum, that we don't expect these kids to do better or worse than these kids over here. We expect high expectations for all the kids and access for all of them.
Beats a 5-minute bell schedule.
Oh.
We can dream. Well, this is dreaming, right?
Yeah.
This is about 30 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, not even 30 years, it's about 15.
15, okay.
Mine
With a
was very
7
close
period
to
day.
the-
With a
my
7
first
period
one I
day.
put
Well,
down.
that's the other one. We're going to have to expand the day.
Right. Need a longer day.
Or more periods.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first and most important one is this one we're talking about, at least in my mind, and I think that's what we spend a lot of time talking about, is all kids, regardless of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, are achieving at high levels,
Yeah.
so really along the same line, it has to work for everybody, right, not just some.
I guess my last one updated all district facilities so that they are accessible to all kids and families as well as staff. Because maybe one day we'll have staff with disabilities.
So when we,
Physical disabilities.
right, and they define what she done, that's not there anymore. Not in that way. So now we can start to talk about how do we want to define what
Is
she
that
done.
fair?
And then, because
My third was around I think
some of which,
same expectation, or high expectations for all students to access gap is mine was around that one.
some kids.
Then I also was playing around with some way to describe attributes of students, 30, 15 years from now, as they're experiencing curriculum and leadership and mentorships and programs, they're evolving to become confident, high self-esteem, able to make, good decisions. I don't know, that is, it's the agency. You want kids to be able to make choices with confidence for themselves, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at.
What we doing, and I hope that
If you want kids, they can go out there and actually, you could, people, period, I mean, be able to
so
function.
many 17
On those
what do you wanna
levels.
do? And it's like, I don't know, go to college?
Most eloquent way to say it. Phil,
And then
what's-
my last one was more parent participation in our students' educational success. And it's one I've been trying to, and I didn't word it as nicely, but I kind of, I like what where Janet's going as far as, we're having a well-rounded person, but I think many times we miss just the parent part of the equation, because parents are the first teachers of their students, and we have parents that have completely tuned out, and getting them back in, I think, is going to help us on many levels, and targeting parents, not in a way that they're not helping parents be successful parents. I guess it's
Yep.
something along those lines.
So I'm going outside the classroom just like Phil did on the last one. Maybe in short, since you got a very little bit of space there,
Got another sheet of paper. So-
increased community participation in the success of the district. So I think about our challenge south of 6 and east of the river with housing patterns that have been generational in place, and what the role of the community could be in helping us fix that, and helping bridge divides between Coralville, North Liberty, and Iowa City, how we can work more effectively as a metropolitan community.
Yeah, because that community too can provide those kinds of internships and apprenticeships
Oh,
and
yeah.
things like that. And there's
Yeah.
That ties to a lot of other,
Yeah,
Because you've chosen it, we have
Yeah,
all
that's
this
good.
in place, but
I
when you
just
start
got last one before we pick up.
Yeah, mine was kind of a little different. It was,
kids,
I guess I focused on almost kind of the point I had said about expectations, those expectations. I think it's important to, I kind of went to, if you're gonna do any of this stuff, that we ought to, like, at that point, teachers and leaders ought to be able to point to and say, that's how we did it, right? And so if we were gonna be sharing that model with somebody else, we should be very confident to say, this is how we accomplished all of these things, right? Then we can articulate that to another group of people, because I think we have a lot of good things happening, but, are we confident in saying, we know this works for this and that works for that? So,
I'd like
just
to-
in some ways,
I'd
I
like
like
to
to
see
communicate
it
out that roadmap of this is how you do it.
5 years.
So I won't put it up there, 'cause I don't think it fits very well with what we.
How we
I
did
think
it.
this is a-
Did you get into a field that you wanted? Post graduation, 5 years out. Have we set you up?
And really, this kind of is almost.
Yeah.
Right, I think you got it grouped very well.
Yeah.
That,
Are you in school? Are you working?
when you're looking at the community includes parents and all that, and I like that the facilities have to be accessible to all, and
obviously.
not just where it's most needed, but everywhere,
Right.
because we never know what the future needs will be, and that.
You see yourself with a community member that you bump into at the convenience store, or the gas station, or a civic group, or church, or wherever? Can you see yourself being able to
Well, I mean, who knows?
pretty quickly
Even if you did
explain to them what those
We're
chunks
not worried
are?
about that right now.
I asked the other group, what would I tell my 91-year-old mother-in-law Dorothy, who's a sharp lady, but she's 91? How would I say that to her? So chew on that for a minute or two. I'll see how they're doing. And, as always, it's fascinating to see there's some overlap and some differences too. So we'll mush them together and see what we have in a few minutes. So how would you explain that to a citizen, a parent, a community member that doesn't have kids in school? Yeah? If you're talking, then all that'll come out. You'll be able to speak to that.
If he starts on in 7th grade.
Normally, the older people that talk to me is mainly about cost.
And you have
So what does that feel?
I say mainly when I get approached by an older resident about the schools, it's about cost.
Oh.
Because they're on fixed incomes, and they're very keen to keen to that, but one thing the calls that I get, and maybe it's just because it's one of my passions and something that I've been driven, is that I just continually get people calling and asking why there just isn't, the career and technical curriculum like there used to be. And I had a very good call from a person that was a dental hygienist and said that she, in the 40s and 50s, she took the shop classes because that was an interest of hers, and then that broke down her fears of going into a field where she had to work with equipment and tools and things like that. But, they're also interested to make sure that we have curriculum that meets all students and does that. I get from a lot of people too is that addressing the student population as a whole and not breaking them, chopping them up into little categories.
Now they have.
Yeah, I think this is a critically important one for, especially the kind of area that I work in most of the time, with our secondary schools, is thinking about either what are those pathways or those career experiences for kids, and do we define those very well, knowing that those specific roles and jobs may change, but then how do we blend that with the necessary skills to be able to adjust and adapt, right, when they go through. So it may be a pathway today, that pathway may be eliminated tomorrow, but did we give them the skills that they would be able to then jump pathways to? So I really think this is a lot of our work coming up, and I think we hear that from a lot of our partners, that this is needed, that either kids aren't coming in with the skills or they aren't even aware of the opportunities for them. And so I think that's big, especially for, I see it probably critically important at the secondary level, but those skills don't just start secondary wise, right? They start elementary school wise too. So, but that's a lot of the conversation we've been having recently with partners in the community.
And we do an online, which how kids do. Financial literacy.
These are somewhat easy, like in an elevator speech format, right? I mean, you're talking about all kids, getting rid of any kind of achievement or access gap we have for people. Here we're talking about, trying to identify those experiences, pathways for students to pursue. And then here, kind of how do we bring that full community group of stakeholders together to achieve this
Yeah,
goal,
I was
right?
just thinking about that, how it is already sort of segmented off into those three areas.
Fourth bullet down,
Focusing
his
in on
INT.
kids,
INT, career and academic development.
skill set and achievement, both and
Right in the middle of the page.
Yeah.
What's
making sure
INT
that we're
stand for?
providing them what they need, whether it's educational or career, technical, so.
Internships, career.
We're done. We got it.
You're an advanced
We
group.
just need to wordsmith the
Bam.
actual vision statement itself, and we're good.
Okay, you keep wordsmithing for a couple minutes. I'm gonna let them know that the pressure's on.
Or the pressure's off, because it's already.
Financial literacy, parenting. So I guess
Anything else?
No, I think we're good.
No, I think that's.
Unless somebody has something.
That's all right. They three areas.
This is true.
It's true.
Kristen, that note that I had to send around to the press about that thing Wednesday morning, we should probably send these guys too, just to be
Okay.
aware, I forgot to do that.
We got a STEM Best grant from the state.
Yes, I saw that, yeah.
Thank you for the letter with that, but we're just doing like a little kickoff with our teacher group for that and talking about, and so it just made me think of it because part of that work is talking about some of these pathways and some of that too. But Wednesday morning here in the lab at ESC, we're just doing a little breakfast and a thank you and kicking that off with that teacher group. So Kristen will forward that on to you. But
What does that mean with getting that grant? What is?
so it provides us, I stated 4 goals in the grant, and so one of those goals is 21st century skills for all kids. Another one is instructional strategies for teachers to help them accomplish that. The third one is
trying to identify pathways for kids, the same conversation we've had about saying, okay, we have all these courses, where do they go, what do they lead to, what are those back-end experiences, how should we be doing a better job on the exploratory end? And then the fourth one is really about establishing community partnerships to support that work. So those are the 4 goals, and then we'll have a teacher and leadership team that tries to work through and say, okay, here's the goals, how do we accomplish them, right? So instead of us prescribing anything, we really would have that group work through and say, what's the best way to leverage the resources and talent we have to do that. So to really kind of provide the funds will provide the time for teachers and leaders to do that, and that might involve some visits to some other districts that are doing some innovative things in that, and bring that learning back here and talk about it, pulling community partners in with that group. Then to actually do some of the PD, we're partnering with the University of Iowa they're going to provide some of that PD, Leslie Flynn and Don Bolus, what they do with that STEM Innovator course. So they'll work through that piece too. I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be some good stuff for us.
Super. So grant makes me think we got some money.
It's $25,000. So it's not huge, but it's enough for us to
better than
get some people in the room. And
That's right.
Yeah.
It's, it definitely shows, well, it's from this,
It's the Governor's STEM Advisory Council.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
well, it's good to be on their radar too.
Exactly. Yep.
I think that unintended benefit of it will be, like we've already received communication about being involved in some different meetings with other districts that are trying to do some of the same things. So just the learning you get from how are other districts trying to tackle these same issues, right? Iowa City's not the only one trying to do this, so how can we learn from our peers with it too?
I don't know that anyone is a real shining model of how you get all of
Yeah.
everyone recognizes the problem, but as far as getting all parties in and that's the crux of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the grant's there, right? Because
Yes.
they're trying to incentivize people. You need to have this conversation.
Yeah.
You need
Somebody
to do
needs
this.
to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. Why not us?
I just sent it, Matt, so everybody should have it.
Well, especially because some of the other areas of the state are struggling so much more than we are to try to get
Right.
everybody in the same room, everyone willing to participate. I mean, I listen to those tales out of Southwest Iowa where they just can't get cooperation and buy-in from the community college.
Yeah, the challenges I think are different, right, Steve? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
some places they don't have partners to go to. Other places, the size and I think pulling those
Yep.
partners together in those massive
Geographically,
organizations
it's
is hard, you
it's
know?
just
So,
But I think to a certain extent, especially in our state, we've reached critical mass in the recognition that there's a real problem with the product that's coming out, not being able to fit right into a lot of
Yeah.
employment opportunities.
Yep.
And that we stand to lose industry if industry and the schools don't partner together and get this thing turned around in a short period.
Yeah, the misalignment between job openings and job skills. I don't know if I sent you guys that report from let's see, I'll probably find it here. The metrics on the workforce development piece, but they essentially said we're like ships passing in the night. The kids coming out of high school, community college, and college aren't aligned with the job skills and the openings that employers throughout the state have, and so it's stymieing economic development where growth could happen. It's not because the employment base isn't allowing them to make that next step.
and we don't have mountains and we don't have oceans, so
Yeah.
it's got to be our people, right? It's got to be our workforce here in Iowa.
Yes.
That's the reason that some of these partners would come, to us in Iowa. That's the thing we have to really hang our hat on, I think, so.
Well, that would actually be not a bad thing to put in the vision, is somehow we're aligning that word again with business, industries, job requirements, and, we're ensuring that all of our educational experiences are.
That's what that should be what we're providing for the community.
That's a component of that community piece, that community
Right.
engagement, is understanding what is needed, what students need to have when they get finished in school.
Did I send you that Iowa
Yeah.
metrics from Future Ready Iowa? Yeah.
Future ready, that was one.
Yeah. Because it's workforce development and the Economic Development Authority. It's the governor's office, the regents, Iowa Department of Ed, Economic Development Authority and Workforce Development.
There's a lot of groups working on that, there's a lot of trying to define job skills, communicate those to colleges, community colleges. Gotta create the pipeline.
So the four highest demand jobs in the next decade here: information security analysts, computer system analysts, electricians, registered nurses.
Data analysts aren't on there.
And is that Midwest or nationwide?
That's Iowa.
That's Iowa.
That's
sure,
Iowa.
Because of our retiring
Yeah.
numbers of retirees and also the.
And then they looked at them by percentage and then by aggregate numbers. So by annual growth rate, the four highest are wind turbine service technicians, occupational therapy assistants, operations research analysts, information security analysts, and by numbers, it's registered nurses, elementary school teachers, accountants and auditors, and sales reps for wholesale and manufacturing.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So that's for Iowa, that's it's targeted.
very specific to
So
Iowa.
information security could be because of our heavy insurance industry, I wonder.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know how to
But
say
you
it.
also have to, you know, there's, right now there are 200,000 construction jobs nationwide
Yeah.
that aren't filled.
right. I don't think Iowa.
Look, you-
Yep, but I don't think Iowa. These guys didn't want to export any of our young people.
Well, right.
I think that's
But, and when Kim Reynolds was speaking at City High in the question and answer period, you know, I tried to pin her down on in one of the things she was talking about at City High is that they were going to forgive students loans that went into high demand fields.
Yeah,
And it's like, okay, and then the guy from Principal Group spoke and said, well, 40% of the jobs of tomorrow haven't even been
Right.
haven't been officially decided or created, right? And you know, down in Bentonsport, there's a blacksmith college, which we can look at blacksmithing as being an outdated technology, but they've got a 2-year waiting list for people interested in learning those skills, forming metal. And, you know, UNI has a program on metallurgy that before the guy, when students are in their junior year, they've already got jobs locked up in Detroit because there just aren't enough people to fill those positions. So
Yeah.
it's hard to, every time you try and say, well, we don't have enough engineers, we're doing that well, then all of a sudden you got a whole bunch of engineers that are working in Starbucks. It's hard to predict the future.
yeah. One of the things the report says is really teaching kids to learn. So that
Yes, but the other thing is and I don't have it because I'm outdated technology and I stay with obsolete technology. So I pride myself. But, you know, everybody with a smartphone can get the answer to everything at the speed of light. But skills never go away. So those basic skills are important.
Yeah, and those 21st century skills, when you look at them, most of them are soft skills, right? Emotional intelligence, communication.
Yes, well, and that's the thing the guy
Yeah.
with Principal Group was saying there at City High too, is that, says, well, I spoke with him after the conference, and he says, we're not looking for he says, at our, with his business and 15,000 employees, he says, we don't look for the valedictorians. We look for that average kid that's a struggler, that's a scrapper and a worker, and can communicate with other human beings.
So social skills are
Yes.
super important.
Yes.
They
Well,
really are.
And you know, we're getting to a point with we have to be careful with technology that technology just doesn't change us into things we don't want to be.
We do that. So we have a hard time right now keeping auditors at ACT because like TA and Rockwell pay like twice what we do. So we get people straight out of college who have great social skills, who pass the accounting exam, maybe not stellar, but they are trainable and they're eager and excited, and unfortunately we become a train vet for Transamerica and
You get them on train
Rockwell.
level, then they go.
And
And the thing is,
we get great,
Yeah. Well, and
word
that's
for
the thing
good
too
time.
with a lot of these blue collar jobs too, is that you have to have, employers are willing to train, but you have to have somebody that can come in on day one and at least have a certain
Yeah.
basic skill set
Yeah.
and what you call like shop etiquette,
Yeah.
that they feel they would invest in to train into that person that they want. So, yeah, employers are doing a lot of things.
Glad to hear accounting is still a job needed in Iowa.
Perfect.
That's what my
That's good.
daughter's going into. Yes. Yeah.
Just an observation from the tail end of the group that just rejoined us here is they're talking about the big ideas. Lori had mentioned this notion of, imagine if somebody writes an article about us and it's, 10, 12, 13 years out. The energy to get behind that and envisioning that kind of stuff, this kind of stuff really happening. What would it take? And it starts with a pretty clear vision about where we headed. Otherwise, you've heard the saying, any road will get you somewhere. And so it is capturing that piece and committing to it. So let's just start with this group, and then you know where we're headed. We're going to look across both lists and see what are the energizing chunks as you think about where we headed, where do we see ourselves hoping to head. So I need somebody to, other than Amy, thanks for helping with note taking. Need somebody from the other group to share here about your big ideas, and the rest of the group chime in terms of unpack this for a couple minutes.
I'll just jump in. So we pretty consistently talk about a greater variety of opportunities for kids, closing achievement gaps, and with an understanding of what achievement means for different students, and then a climate of inclusion that sort of ties in kind of equity and kind of having that climate survey be very, very different, that every kid feels they like school, they want to come to school, they feel welcome and supported.
And you can see out of, am I correct, the greater variety of opportunities, that looked a lot like the items that were marked A, correct? These sort of things. Paul, you kind of led the charge a little bit on the plan idea. Would you elaborate on that for a minute or two?
Yep, we talked about having students be on a path so that when they graduate, they're going to be successful at whatever they choose to do. That doesn't mean college necessarily, but we're starting that early, junior high, age, and kind of working with them as they go through. And then once they're gone, we talked about measuring the outcome to see if they're still doing what they were on the path to do, or if they changed. And then you look at a lot of the stuff that we tied in there, setting them up for success also meant maybe focusing on some life skills or financial literacy, things of that nature, and just having a broad range of opportunities for them to choose from.
So rather than having it sitting across the table from a 17-year-old, what do you want to do? Right? That they actually over time have shaped a plan. Their plan might have a couple of options, and that, or more than a couple, and that they're prepared regardless which pathway, and they can even change their mind. They're prepared where they start on this pathway and a year into it go, not for me. Do I have what I need to go to plan B, which has also been a passion and interest, something that I've nurtured over time, right, as a kid. So that sort of thinking, which is cool. And then I think JP mentioned the idea of, I've read some about schools that have been able to make some significant progress. I'm not sure as much about systems. And that's why I wrote that intro as imagine your whole district. That's the big challenge. There are individual schools, that have made some significant headway. The challenge is how do you help a whole system so it moves beyond pockets of excellence and random acts or even intentional acts of improvement to systemic improvement. You know, yeah. Anything else that your other group members would want to comment on about this?
I'd just add in, you know, I think JP brought up the life skills and financial literacy and parenting and things like that. You know, we talk about, you know, are you going to go to college? Are you going to go vocational? Or what are you going to do? Well, that's professional stuff. You're always going to turn into an adult and have to do those things regardless of what that choice is for school or whatever else. And I think kind of tying that into the education is like, whether you're going to college or going right into a career or whatever else you're going to do, you will also need to have these skills and have them available for them. I think that was a great point.
Yeah, that's one I wish I had, and that's one I had been thinking we should put in. I neglected to put in our set, but absolutely right. And you know, you can look at a like a home building or a home maintenance course a few different ways. We all, the goal of everyone who walks across and gets a diploma is they're going to, at some point in time, have a house or an apartment or something like that, and knowledge of a lease, rental agreements, things like that. That's everyday life skills that they need to possess, mortgages, those things. Same thing with automotive, buy, lease, new, used, all those things. So that type of curriculum, which opens other pathways and doors, also is beneficial to everybody in a broader sense. And yeah, I like that one. I wish I had.
That's part of the benefit of doing two smaller groups, so this stuff percolates out. The other thing I think, Phil, I hear in your comment is it's not just preparing kids for the workforce or career choices, it's preparing kids for life.
Yes.
They're successful in life.
Right.
Period.
And just as the oldest one on that, maybe not the oldest one here, but the oldest one on the board.
Be careful on that.
We're not going to talk about that. But anyway, I've always drawn back to just a couple generations back to how self-reliance was the pride in their self-reliance, and you know, a generation that built their own homes and maintained their own homes and did those things, and how we're getting removed from that. But I do sense in my daughter's generation a real desire, not so much in possessions, but in abilities and skills. You know, to be able to do things and to go back to some of these basic human things of making things and having the pride and success and accomplishment.
One other comment about this one, that it was fun to be over there, come back here, go back over there a couple times. At one point in your guys' conversation, the idea came up of, well, what about achievement gaps? You know, that's been a challenge across the country for years, and we've been at that. And then what percolated out is closing the achievement gap. I'm trying to restate here. Didn't necessarily mean every kid ends up at the exact same spot, because there are kids who maybe are unable to verbalize. And so they're not taking the same third grade reading tests that most kids can take and handle, may not play out for them. And I thought, well, this would be interesting to see where that conversation goes. And they kept going and went back a little later, and then they went back, you guys revisited achievement gaps. Would somebody explain what you mean by closing the achievement gap? So it doesn't mean every kid ends up exactly at the same spot, but what does it mean? The idea of looking across big subgroups and major groups of kids. Well, how would you state that? Help me out here. When you say we're closing the gaps, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I said when we were talking about that was that we're not going to see a difference based on race. You know, when we measure, we're not going to see 50% in one category and 75% in another. That we're, you know, and it's not that we're lowering the 75%. It's just that we're moving ahead at the same pace. We're not leaving people behind.
Then I opened my yap and said you could probably make the same case for socioeconomic status as well. That you wouldn't see major gaps, and that was the idea of, you guys had one about address, you have it here about educational experience, but you could also make that comment about what about their achievement, their learning. Should it be heavily influenced by where their address is? You know, and so anyway, they ended up, I think it's this idea of when we look at our district learning of kids. We would not see these gaps between major suburbs. And as we close those, it doesn't come, as my colleague used to say, cutting off the heads on the short ones to make them all the same height, holding back kids. It's going to be, how do we help everybody move forward? And for kids who struggle behind, how do we continue to help speed up their rate of learning so the gap isn't as wide? So good conversation. The group that was down here needs somebody other than Matt to take first run here at talking us through what you guys ended up with.
Well, we kind of broke ours up into, could we get that over on this side? Then that way it's,
Yeah, sorry.
I'm, as the older one, I have the weakest eyes. Yeah.
Let's put it right on top of.
Yeah. We kind of broke, we found three kind of reoccurring categories just with everybody going around in the group, and we had achievement gap, closing it, from trying to reduce it by 50%, and one of the things I wanted it, if we're looking 15 years down the road, that it's a word that's no longer used in our vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
We just look at student achievement, and it's not that we have to break it down into categories, kind of like what you guys are coming up with as far as all students. And I have a community member that always comes up to me and is constantly saying, just talk about all students. Don't break them down. And what you want to get is to make sure that they're all achieving in those areas. And, we have personal learning experiences tailored to specific interests, kind of falling into that. Then we went into providing opportunities for all students, kind of that same successful, we wanted all students to be successful no matter how they went, whether career or college, and to expand those opportunities and economic and in academic development and that in a robust curriculum. Then we got into increasing community participation, facility access for all students, falling into the inclusive, kind of what the other group had with inclusive, that and parent participation. I guess we were looking at how do we get the business and the schools together, how do we get parent involvement with their student success, and in just kind of the facilities, that whole kind of community aspect that way.
So I'd ask this, as you look at these, I look at their first couple, the close the achievement gap, clearly quite similar to B from this group, right? And we could, kind of push it back and forth about this part of that, and they're thinking it was, and you could also say it's maybe part of A over here, but same kind of ideas, right, emerging there. Across here, what's your take in terms of the other list?
The greater variety of opportunities, yeah, it's a very similar discussion.
A,
Yeah, opportunities, career, academic, but then also that, the experiences to navigate and make choices, that sort of plan A, plan B that you guys were talking about.
This one here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your first choice may not pan out, but you've developed the skills to make decisions to help you figure out what plan B is. It's helping get the skills to navigate.
And figuring out that there's not this artificial disjunction between career and academics, that kids see how they fit together.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and I think Phil was talking about this earlier, or somebody else mentioned that, you're starting young, so that as a junior high student, you've got 2 or 3 different pathways, and I take this class because it means it leads to this, which I need to do that, regardless of where you're going and what you're doing, that there's some sequence that makes sense, because kids today are always asking, why do I have to learn this? Why do I have to learn this? We need to tell them this is why you have to learn this. They need to know that.
Yeah, and there's a very good article in Welding Magazine about Boys Town and how they went 100% to college track, and now they went back into the trades in the worst way in career technical. And it used to be people would make the saying that, well, if you're not college material, you can go into this. No, no, no. It's, are you good enough to be a tradesman? Are you good enough to master a skill of welding or masonry or construction? And absolutely, math, the Pythagorean theorem and all those things. If you want to put up a square wall, you better know geometry. And it's just getting it into a thing that a student can understand, that A and B is A squared, B squared is C squared. That's the same as putting up a wall for a closet. So it's putting it in that area that way.
There's a practical application directly there. That when Steve was commenting, not only if I'm interested and have passions, I'm energized by pathway A and B, these are the kinds of courses I need, but the other side, to recognize if I'm interested in C and I don't prepare myself with these kinds of courses, those doors have closed tight on me unless I find myself later on wanting to backfill at community college or remedial work or whatever. So helping kids decide, understand both things, what to take to be prepared for my things I'm excited, interested in, and what kind of things are going to close the door if I
I don't
don't.
remember who said it in our group with the phrase of having multiple on-ramps throughout time, I think was
Yeah.
kind of apropos to that is maybe you're not quite seeing the picture now, so I'm not ready to get on my path to success. Next year, oh, something clicked, now I'm ready to do it. It's not too late at that point to keep them on, get them on that path. I think that was a good point.
And you endured me telling you about my mother-in-law Dorothy, but if I said multiple on-ramps, Dorothy would go, I know what you're talking about.
Well, and we talked a lot about having some authentic experiences for kids that run that gamut from job awareness, job shadowing, internship, apprenticeship. How does that continuum fall in there so that kids are trying earlier so that they know? Because for so many kids, they struggle with, I only know what my parents do, and my parents only think in the construct of this is what I do. And so, Phil made the comment earlier that there are so many jobs that we don't know what they're going to be. So how can we open it up so that the students aren't constrained by that which they know or their parents know, but that they've been out there and tried something that's different?
And do that well before they're almost at the end of career and technical training or an internship at a job or in their third or fourth year of college and go, I don't really like teaching. Boy, that's a heck of an order. I don't really like nursing. My niece, third year in college, and figured out nursing isn't for her. Dang for Courtney. I mean, that's a lot of time and money she invests.
Just talking to the people that run we were looking at the workforce development. They were talking about the careers that have the greatest upside in Iowa, and one of them is wind turbine support. And one of the things that they didn't do until recently was recognize that fear of heights is something that you need to be aware of. Exactly. Well, they had kids going through this program, and then at the end they go up and they're like, I can't do this. So now in the very first class that you take, if you're at one of the Iowa community colleges, if you're going to be a wind turbine technician, first week they are putting you up in a tower, and if you get up there and say, this ain't working for me, great, let's find you another career because this is a bad choice.
It's a pretty big one.
Yeah.
Great example.
Not for me, but
I used to unload aid ships, super tankers, and on the job application they would ask if you had a fear of heights. I'm saying, we're talking about ships at sea. Super tankers 90 foot deep, and when you're unloading the grain, you're going up and down the ladders on that thing all the time. So absolutely,
Yeah.
You don't want to find out in your third year.
You don't get out on the ship and you say, I'm sorry, I'm not going down anymore.
I'm good on
So
that.
what do you see as you look across here? The obvious is A and B are pretty similar, and then it looks to me like each group has a.
Well,
It's
one
still
more
about
piece.
inclusion. I think.
I think that was
we
threaded
have
through the
similar
whole
themes
thing.
Yeah.
across the board, because that all talks about the sense of inclusion, either including parents, getting them more involved, or making sure that our facilities offer the access needed so people can be included.
I think that we didn't talk about that. I mean, you guys have some stuff in here
Right.
that's great that we didn't talk about, like bringing the community in very much in our discussion, because that's what I'm seeing here, like.
But I mean, with the big
Parents,
picture
it
ideas
is,
that
right.
you have, it falls under that
Assistance.
climate of inclusion.
I see it as similar, but yeah, we were also, when we were talking to the community too, that also tied into kind of our developmental point that we make sure that business is brought in the discussion on career paths and things along those lines.
I think there's not a right or wrong.
Right.
My gut level was if we had to stop and move on right now, I'd probably say maybe you have four things. You got the A and B, and then you have, their conversation was clearly more focused from my ear on kids and kids feeling a part of and belonging and fitting in, and your conversation here was broader. And it's a win-win. It's maybe both items.
Community engagement or community involvement
Yeah.
as a fourth.
Yep.
Because that's a specific
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
This is more heavy student engagement, that's community engagement?
Yeah.
Does that fairly capture the,
Go with that.
all right? Student engagement. I gotta make sense of all these notes here, so, engagement and community.
How you doing capturing all this?
See, Matt, your handwriting doesn't look too bad compared to mine.
It's not great.
I can remember getting D's and my teacher telling me it was a borderline D, so I remember that sort of stuff. So kind of four areas, looks like. And you'll have the notes, you can go back and refine or whatever, but I'm asking you to think about, we got this right, you've got four areas on this, and then I'd like to take a look at, let's lay that beside some other documents that you've had in the past in terms of what elements are brought to it, and you can energize with more language and all that sort of thing. But there's a robustness, it's always fascinating to me. A couple areas very similar, and then you each had an area that had a little different pathway on it, and that's a healthy thing, I think, to have. So any additional comments about four areas from this conversation? And I would propose that that's one way to think about our vision, where we have it. It's around these four areas, potentially.
It's not really for me to decide, but I guess I think about what Ruthina said about, we didn't talk about the student piece, but I still think you think about inclusion and then for who, right? Well, it's for all your stakeholder groups. On one sense, students are some,
Right.
parents are some, community members, staff, you know, you have all of those different areas that really have to feel included in whatever the district's doing. So whether you tease that out into two different ones or not, I still think it's that general concept of inclusion and how do we account for all those stakeholder groups, right?
So maybe three areas with the fourth one's just kind of a little deeper or flesh out a little more.
Well, in the end, it's right, like all the kids leave the district and say, boy, I'm really glad I went to school in that district. And parents are like, wow, I'm really glad we moved there and I sent kids to school in that district. And businesses are like, wow, I'm really glad I set my business in that school district. Right. In the end, everybody's really pleased with how they fit
Yes.
into the picture and how the picture fit around them.
And what does that look like? What would it look like for staff members? Same kind of parallel statement. What would you expect or hope to hear from staff members? Help me out here.
They love working here.
Uh-huh. Anything else? What would you hope to hear from them? They love working here.
It's where they're retiring.
I'm sending my kids to this district.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They feel empowered about the work they're doing for our kids.
we're making a difference here for kids. I can see the efficacy
Even
or
in May.
satisfaction.
I'd be happy if they said it in May. That would be amazing.
Maybe in February, we need better.
That would be great.
Second week of March.
And in fact, in terms of lead-ins, just play this out a minute, back to your opening comment about how do we get energy around this. Imagine yourselves as board members, 2-3 years ago, the board did some listening tours. Imagine other formats as board team that you're working. Imagine administrators and teachers having the conversation. What would these four areas or three areas look like and sound like from your vantage point? Students, what would high school kids say? What would teachers, what would teacher associates say? What are your friends and neighbors, what would they say? That looks like, and get people to invite them into helping develop the language that describes where you're headed. Then they also own it. Once Dorothy can start to put it in her words, it may not have been as pure as what JP or Phil had in mind, but if they're in the ballpark, right, that's an opportunity. And that's part of what I think you want, any system, what you want to look at. How do we engage and invite others into the conversation? And you appeal that emotional side. What's it look like from my vantage point? What am I going to see? Right? 10, 8, 13 years from now.
Just touching back on the teacher part of it, to enjoy working here. I've been to 2 staff listening posts at the elementaries right now, and one thing I'm not hearing a lot of is that they're able to teach, because a lot of teachers, that's what they want to do, is teach the kids, and maybe they're doing more management or whatever it is. They're not teaching, so they lose their enjoyment there. They just want to be able to teach.
Well, and imagine a high school counselor, a group of teachers, a principal and an assistant principal talking with kids from school, small groups, and finding out from them what if you really fell apart, what's going on here, or we were hitting home runs on A, helping you with a learning plan. What would that look like for you as a kid? And just listen to their voice coming into that when a 7th grader is describing at the end of 7th grade what it means for her, and then a 9th or 10th grader describing. They've had a couple years of this planning, and then you roll it out to when they're a junior or senior. You ought to see and hear, right? It's exciting. I'm not saying you aren't already doing that. I don't know what you're doing. But systemically, you start to get energy around that, and all of a sudden, I think that's where you see that energy come into play. The kids are going, yeah, I do remember talking about that in 7th grade. You know, I found out heights aren't for me, but here are 2 things I really like. You know, medicine wasn't even on my radar screen. But I'm pretty interested in radiology, or I'm pretty interested in, I like heights, repairing wind turbines, whatever it might be, right? And you'll see the energy come from that, which is cool. That's a fun thing to think about. So let's do this for about 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll take a quick break, and then we'll tune in on the strategic plan. I would ask you to do this. On the right-hand side of your materials, to help set the stage. On the right-hand side is your mission statement. And I just want you to while you're on a restroom break and whatever else, I want you to think about this. And then there's 2 sheets behind it highlighted in yellow. I may be full of pride, and that's okay too. You'll tell me pretty quickly. But this is something that caught my attention and my colleague. I just said, hey, take a look at the mission statement. It's pretty succinct, it's pretty cool. Going to be working with Iowa City next week, and I had already spent some time about it, and my colleague said almost the same thing. When you think about mission as why we exist, and vision where we headed, that 2nd paragraph of your mission, almost, to me, that's got kernels of where we headed. Whether that's by design or not. If it's by design, good for you as a district. If it wasn't by design, I think that's worth looking at. And then that's the section on the next sheet I highlighted in yellow. And then I just changed it up on the 3rd sheet where I put foundation of a possible vision statement. And then you plug in this stuff, or you figure out where the overlap is. But imagine each kid is challenged through a rigorous creative curriculum taught by blah, blah, blah. Enrich your resources and efforts of family, entire community. I start to see some overlap with your areas that are in your language tonight, which you kind of hope, wouldn't you, that this isn't a whole brand new thing. By the same token, I think there's some things that came out stronger in the discussion tonight that you may not read, just read a 1-sentence statement. So I'll ask you when we're on a break, you think about that for a minute. And then in terms of, to move on to the next part, so we'll circle back on this after the break. I'll talk for a couple of minutes on that. And then Amy, and that will lean on you for the whirlwind tour on where are you with the strategic plan goals. I want you to have that in mind too before we do the next exercise, which starts us into these sort of things are happening, and if our mission is what we really want, how does it start to play out? What do we see happening in that work moving forward? And you will help us not throw out the baby with the bathwater here by where you've got some momentum, but also there may be some things that are missing that should be considered as you move forward. Fair enough? So let's take a break. Are we good for about maybe 8-10 minutes? Have enough time to, so around 7-ish, I'll ring the banner and we'll catch back up. Thanks so much for your engagement so far. So, time go okay for you? I always worry about not wanting this to drag or anything. Okay? Yep. All right, thank you. So I'm thinking,
You gonna pull it up?
Can you read writing on those when you're
I already have it all down, so,
Dang.
yeah.
And
Although,
I promised you I'd flag you. and I screwed it up.
you're fine. I thought if nothing else, I'll have it all down
that's
for you
good.
if you want it, but I
Perfect.
need to flip this last chart. Did you do
Oh,
some
yeah.
A and B coding on that?
We did.
Let me just get the A's and B's on that one down.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, I think, if you took this, if you said, just like if you parallel the mission of, the vision of, is to challenge to do it.
Yep, you did, yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, yep, yeah.
Go to work.
No, I wait for my husband, so we're not going until tomorrow.
All right.
And I think kind of like,
Yeah.
it's good to them, it's a one-stop shop for a lot of people.
I was tempted to vote at the library, but, you know, we're here at that. So I'm like, I can wait till Tuesday night, because on my way to P&G, I'll just stop by Mercer, because it's our polling place.
Oh, okay.
So
Oh, that's
easy
not bad.
peasy.
Yeah,
Because I know it's gonna be some.
I'm sure it's not.
Long day, Kristen.
Not bad. I just need to stand more. I feel like it's been a long day of
How long have you
meetings.
been at work? Do you come in like at 8?
Like about 7:30 usually,
Okay.
so.
Yeah.
But it's just been well, it's not Tuesday. I keep thinking it's Tuesday, but today just was really meeting heavy. So at least sometimes you can be up and around a little bit,
Yeah.
but today was a lot of just sitting.
Funny
So.
story, on my way out the door from work today, I tell my staff, all right, have a great weekend. And they're like,
Whoa.
it's only Monday,
I know.
Regina? I'm like, oh, Lord. And they're like, are you okay? I'm like, no, it's been a long Monday. I thought it was Friday.
That's a long week ahead of you too.
And I'm like, have a good weekend. And the confused looks on their faces. They were sort of like, sorry.
It'll be Friday before you know it. It'll be
No.
fine.
I have a 3-hour meeting at work tomorrow, and then I have 2 4-hour meetings on Thursday and Friday. It's building, because we're getting a new building, so.
Yeah,
Sure, the
I saw
architects and
all
stuff.
the
It's
construction
gonna be a
stuff
nightmare
there.
downtown
Yeah.
on that corner.
It's Seashore?
Yep, they're closing down the walkway between Van Allen and
Oh, wow.
Seashore. So that gets closed on Wednesday, and then right in front of Spence Lab, it's all, I mean, they gave us diagrams, I'm like, I have no clue where you're telling me to walk. Because it's all these dotted lines in order to get into Seashore now. It's just gonna be a nightmare, students are gonna be so upset, because that side entrance is completely.
We're gonna have to go around.
Yeah, until December 15th, which is the end of winter, yeah.
When they're going home anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
When they're going home anyway.
Yeah, so it's just gonna be, it's gonna be a pain. And
Maybe I should go take
a lot of things.
Sounds good.
She decided she might be interested in engineering. Uh-huh. And so now she did the University of Iowa chemical engineering, and now she works
Hello.
Everybody's like half asleep
for environmental engineer.
This has been
To answer
a
your
long
question.
day.
What?
Yes, I can give you a ride home.
Roof of the factory doing stack tests.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
It's been 6 weeks.
Hmm?
6 weeks so far.
That's awesome. With that orange therapy? Orange theory?
Therapy.
That's not You feel better?
Yeah.
Do they measure it by weight at all? Or is it just?
Yeah, it's just like we get.
Yeah.
So I was telling Sean, that one,
Well, you know,
she lost 12.6.
Two different sizes.
Body weight and
It's a
that
burden.
he was 12.5. She weighed
Sure.
more.
Yep.
Exactly.
Would have had it, yeah. Do they have
Go
a
for
prize
it.
for?
Instead of
I think you told me about that.
to
Yeah.
Belgium. And then they do a national one. And I was like,
And he
those people
says,
ask for help.
I know it's probably not healthy.
Yeah.
you know,
Go out
they
on
come
your
back
own
and they're
and
like,
see what you can do by
okay, I've got
yourself.
like
But 10 grand, I mean,
to figure out how to
Yeah.
I mean, I knew the half before the light. I probably was already. I lost 21 pounds. She lost 21 pounds ago.
It's about 15 kilometers.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
Brussels.
How often do you go?
Somewhere.
I started out going 3 times a week. Up
3 days over in Brussels.
It's weird. Like tomorrow I don't have class, but
My mom was at
So,
Yeah.
Hoover Library.
It does. It becomes kind of an addiction.
yeah. I mean, the great thing is the workouts are always different, so we never.
Flour sacks that Hoover sent over
The
during
work is the same. It's so
that they embroidered and sent back
If
to
you need
thank all
any
the
stuff
Americans
after
for
digitally or whatever for me, just hop off our archives or whatever.
Okay.
And went over there and got the president's
My schedule's been so crazy. I haven't been able to go for like a good solid couple of weeks to where I
the
live.
kindness of others saved from dying.
It's super hard. Like today, I went a couple weeks ago.
They
Go all
probably
night and like 3 or 4 times a week. And then I got back. It was like starting over. It was like sore for 3 days. Like it's, you know. And then I had another couple of weeks just been really with kids' activities and work. And it's just been. And then I
Okay,
started
okay to
school, so,
plow ahead?
you know.
All right, a couple of quick things, and then Amy and Matt will ask you to slide in here. The pink sheet was one I just packed in case, but it was really fascinating. I wasn't sure if we'd use it. This is from Collins and his colleagues' work. Carol, who did the research with him, all the good to great stuff and built to last, et cetera, in their info, and he really pushes, and they do, on the 15 to 20 years. The idea of a longer vision that'll sustain time. So if I feel schizophrenic tonight, where you say I've said 8 to 10 or 10 to 15 or 15 to 20, I am. I'm just trying to navigate. There's not one exact time range. But it's number 2. Is that piece that just kind of serendipitously popped up here right before we took the break. How should it feel? I think that's the emotional connection with people. And that's the real power, I think, across all those role groups. And then we've kind of tackled that third one. If somebody wrote the article, what's it look like? So just interesting. Cool that you went there. If the power went off in a minute and we weren't able to finish up, as you're driving home, what would you say from these 3 or 4? I think I heard pack that third one under inclusion and maybe kind of differentiate out a little bit, kids and others. What would be your takeaway? You walk in the door and somebody at home other than a pet says to you, so you were going to work on vision. What ideas popped up tonight? What would you say to them? Somebody in a nutshell, how would you describe to them this first part?
Well, aside from just saying these things, I think, you know, it feels like we came to a consensus pretty quick on some areas of agreement.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. I mean, you can all read, so you didn't have to restate that, so thank you. As my mother used to say, it's in your head, Harry, it doesn't always come out of your mouth that way, so. What else? Maybe 1 or 2 other things. What else would you say? You did seem to kind of move right to a consensus, which is cool. Everything doesn't require a vote. Some things do, but not everything, so.
I think very generally creating that pathway to success. And that has a whole lot underneath that, but that's the gist of it, right?
1 or 2 other ideas. I'm practicing on wait times. Anything else?
I think it's kind of exciting that we, you know, have a lot of agreement about this variety of things, you know, just that, you know, we don't want to do the same old thing that we were doing in the 80s. Or want to branch out and offer different opportunities.
serious about eliminating the gap, the achievement gap. I think that, I mean, both groups really hit on that very strongly, and taking that seriously, doing things concretely to eliminate that gap.
Absolutely. That's a tall order there.
It's tall.
It's a real tall order. But if you make a solid run at it and don't let yourself off the hook, you can make headway. Districts have some, buildings certainly have made headway on that area, but it's.
One of the
real
things I
hard.
thought about while we were down there talking, and it didn't really fit within the scope of the conversation, but it kind of fits in now, is that really what we're hoping to do is, the 7 board members and the admin team, is create, procedures and things, like an environment that has lasting success long after us, right? Because we're not going to close that achievement gap in 2 years when 4 of us are up for re-election or off the board, depending on how things go, right? Or even 2 years after that when the other 3 are, right? It's got to be, this is how we're going to make something that's sustainable for the next group of folks to come in and just keep on going with it, so that by 2030, we have reached a lot of these things, because it's not going to be by 2019, right?
Right.
And so that's really, you got to find something, and maybe that's where we talk about the buy-in and everything else from the community and businesses and everything else. As long as everybody's, got their voice in it and is participating in creating that whole platform, then it has legs, and it'll keep on going.
I was riffing on something similar, I think, Sean, and it was it's slightly different. It came out when we were talking about the stakeholders and how they feel, like how their experiences, and it's never going to be perfect. In some of the vision stuff that we were talking about, it sounded really just almost a little Pollyanna, and really a happy case. It's like everything's perfect. It's not going to be. To close that achievement gap and these other things that we're talking about, it's going to be super hard. And the way we work together as a community, district, all the different stakeholders went around continuous improvement. Okay, we have a problem. How do we address the problem? How do we tackle something and find a solution and go forward together? How do we have each other's backs throughout that process? How do we seek the right engagement and make sure people are heard and take those voices on board and move forward in that solution? It's how we work together, I guess, is what I was thinking about as a means of sustaining our work towards that vision, right? I don't know, that's...
No, and you think about who's your pool of candidates for the school board in 2 years. It's your community. If you don't make the case and get behind and cast that vision as a board, and your ownership and your absolute commitment to it, then in 2 years, me or somebody will be right back here with who's ever on the board then casting the vision. It's like, no, we're talking about something that it's so compelling, and we're moving on it and we're behind it, that it would be next to impossible for 2 new board members or 3, 4 years from now or 2 years from now would want to even change that we built that commitment out across the community. That it would be, they'd look and go, well, no, we don't want to change the vision, that'd be crazy. But let's talk about how we could strengthen the work around that, our commitment. What's next? Steve, Amy, Matt, what's the next wave of work that's going to help us really move forward on this and continue to build momentum? Yeah, cool. Anything else?
Well, I get, just quickly, what Janet and Sean said, I guess it would be nice in 2 years if not to have the achievement gap closed, but to have the community say the opposite of what they were saying this last time, right? That narrative is more like, we're not talking about trust and accountability and all these things. We're talking about these cool things that are happening.
Where we're headed.
Wow, look at where they're going. This is, and then there's some celebration and some real pride,
Yeah, Phil said achievement gap's not part of our lexicon, right? We just don't have to talk about it that way.
It'd be nice to get to that point, right?
You don't have to convince people that you're going to work on or it needs to be worked on.
Mm-hmm.
You're all, yeah, I think you're,
They can see it, oh, look at this progress, and there's,
yes.
talk about it.
And those of you who were at the orientation a couple weeks ago over at Clear Creek, when I commented about the teamwork, I don't mean holding hands and singing Kumbaya. I mean getting behind where you headed, and that your community just absolutely, I mean, unless that they are not paying attention, that they absolutely see that this board is so narrow-minded on leadership around that vision that they're not going to quit until that it's absolutely you're torn into it, and you're positioned and making headway, and that your administrative team doesn't have to wonder or worry about, well, after the next election we'll see what sticks, but rather that Amy and Matt know, and Steve and whoever else is in your administrative hierarchy, and principals and teachers know that no, we're button down the hatches, right? Full speed ahead. This is what we're after. So what do you have to be like to make it that compelling? And you have a great opportunity to do that work. Enough of the pep talk. So. But exactly, it's spot on. Okay, let's do this. The two of you, thanks, you've been real gracious. Talk to us about an update on strategic plan, and then we'll come back and look at the existing mission statement in this and take it forward from there.
You guys want to sit and walk through it, and I'll just pull the slides up for you?
And the intent here is so that you don't inadvertently throw out the baby with the bathwater, and that you understand where there's some serious momentum. And that doesn't mean it's all perfect, but serious.
And Harry, maybe before we get going, to set the stage,
Please.
because we've got 5 people that are new to the process. So a reminder that we did not have a district strategic plan that was clearly articulated, adopted by the board, et cetera, until 3 years ago. And yes, we were doing strategic work inside, JP remembers this, but a lot of it, to be honest with you, was dialogue between the administrative staff, ICEA, other stakeholders in terms of that process. And so we had a little bit of the issue of gears not meshing, because we had things happening on the inside and things happening on the outside, but they weren't necessarily tied together. So 3 years ago, which is when we first started working with Harry, we said that's not effective. We need to actually come together collectively and develop a strategic plan. So just in another maybe reminder, because this may be outside of your frame of reference because you may not have been thinking about it at the time. At that point in time, there were board goals, and the board goals were very specific to the board as a body. They talked about professional development and growth of individual board members and things like that. So it was very much about boardsmanship and what was happening at the board table. Then there were district goals, and they kind of hung out here. Then there were building goals, which may or may not have been articulated to the district goals, because again, the district goals weren't set at the board table, they were set by the administrators here at the ESC or back at the CAO. And then sometimes the buildings looked at it and said, yeah, that makes sense to us, and other times they said, nah, that's not part of the work we're doing, we're gonna come up with our own goals. And so they had their own goals out there. And so we had a lot of goals. And then when I came in, then the board gave me a set of superintendent goals that weren't linked to any of those. So we literally had dozens of goals hanging out there. So we said, this is not working. What is it that we do? We work with students. What do we want them to do? We want them to achieve. So we reached out to IASB. We had Harry come in. We had the board members. We invited ICEA to the table. They had representatives there. We had members of the administrative team there, and we went through the Leadership for Student Learning framework that IASB has, and Harry was our facilitator for it. It's about 4 months total to go through that. And at the end, and Harry would tell you from that Lighthouse piece and from that Leadership for Student Learning, where's your laser-like focus on no more than 3 things? And poor Harry, because at the time, we were really good about bifurcating, trifurcating these goals. Our goal was this, but we're going to embed these 6 other things in there with this huge run-on sentence, and he had to keep lopping the back ends of the sentences off until we got down to 3. And so the things that we agreed on were we wanted all students to improve their literacy skills, and we wanted to close the gap. We wanted all students to improve their math skills and close the gap. And then back to this conversation that we had here, we wanted to change the discussion about the inclusive environment in which we educate children. And so those were the three things that we came up with. It's been a long time, like I said, trying to come down to three. I think there were like 5 at the end, Harry, if I remember correctly. And it took us forever to get from 5 to 3 because he wouldn't let us have 5. So he could only let us have 3. So it took a long time for us to get there. So that's how we got to where we are today. And so I think sometimes we lose sight, we're not looking in the rearview mirror of recognizing that this is really kind of the first wave of this process. We've really only been in this idea of a strategic plan for 3 years with these 3 goals. And then maybe just bring it forward to today. So one of the things I do every year is I go to staff meetings. So today I was sitting in as a staff member at Lemmy while they were going through their staff meeting. And we spent our entire time talking about their comprehensive school improvement plan. Well, page 1 of that comprehensive school improvement plan is the district strategic plan, because all board goals now have to be linked to the district goals. So we spent all of our time talking about those 3 things. And just as a for instance, so they've got a goal for literacy for all of their students, but then they have the disaggregated data, and they were looking at students whose academic achievement is not on par with the average for the school, and they've got an accelerated goal for students that fall in those categories. And so we're going through that, we're looking at the data, we're looking at FAST data and Iowa assessment data and Envision data, and we're looking at all those data points to do that. That's a very different discussion than I had when I went to staff meetings 3, 4, 5 years ago. That was not what we did at staff meetings. You remember that. Not what we did at staff. There were a lot of reading of the memos going on at staff meetings. This is very different from that, but it's also very new to the folks that are part of the team. So I just want to, as they get ready to roll on it, I think sometimes we just lose sight of the fact that we kind of just got in this car. It wasn't here.
I think as you were talking, Steve, that the A word comes up. It's not a 3-letter word, but alignment.
Alignment.
That piece, you're listening for alignment, and it's fascinating. It's not unique to you guys, how long it takes to get alignment rolled out, where it's actually your position to do that work across the system. And you're right, you guys did resist, and I'd go home rubbing my temples, oh my gosh, they're not gonna get, they're not gonna, I don't think they're gonna narrow the list from 6 things or 7 and in reality, with all the different kind of goals he mentioned, board goals for the board itself, district goals, building goals, in reality, I submit to you, those all become on your list. He's not gonna get away from that. So now he's got, how many buildings do you have here?
28.
Yeah, so he's got 40 goals. Because in reality, anytime you call or somebody asks, buck stops here. So that piece is all at play, and that's the important part of. It's cool to hear that a building has identified and connected with a district focus, not completely different from. And that's before you even get to some of the things you talked about tonight, like planning for all kids. As hard as it's been to do what you're doing, planning for all kids is going to be what we're doing in reading and literacy on steroids, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. Thank you.
So that's a little context for where these 2 are at. So fire away.
All right, so we intend to talk a little bit about overview, current reality, and action steps. And we're going to fly through overview and the reality piece so that we can spend the majority of our time talking about the action steps. So Steve has already shared, we're going to take reading and math together. So first board goal, first this slide here as well as the second slide. I'll say what Steve's already said. With reading and math, we're going to increase proficiencies each year, and we're going to particularly look at each of the subgroups as measured by all this does say elementary and secondary education activities, said Michelle, but left behind. But so those are the 2 goals. They sit under the district goals. And in a little bit, we're going to give you a handout that has all this information. And we're being intentional about not giving you the handouts now because we're afraid you're going to go to the back of it where we want to spend our time with you. So we'll do that. So math reads the same way.
And so in that handout, when we send that around, you'll have a couple, just reference points. We presented obviously to you the annual progress report here, the last meeting. Those are good data points for kind of that autopsy data, if you will, right, of what the current state of affairs is. So we're not going to repeat all that to you tonight. You can go, Steve.
That's on page 29 of the APR if you want to reference back to that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So now action's underway.
So action's underway. I'll start with the MTSS one, and I think this one's kind of critically important to when we talk about that all kids learn. And I would say a lot of our teams, especially our building teams, have invested in that work, that all students need to learn at high levels, and it's our responsibility to make that happen, right? That general mindset piece to start with that. But the only way we get to that point through an MTSS process is to say we have to have confidence that we've identified the important things they should know. And if we can't get to the common things they should know, then it's going to be pretty hard to either intervene or to advance them if we don't have common understanding of that. So there's a whole process we work through with when we say MTSS, multi-tier systems of supports, and really the first thing is to say, do we have common understandings for what the students at this grade level or this subject area should know? Do we have a way to assess that learning? And then how do we respond either when they know it or when they don't know it? It's kind of the 4 questions of the professional learning community model. if you're
Would
familiar
you
with
say
that
those
at all.
4 questions one more time, please? With a slight pause in between each.
Sure, now you put me on the spot.
Oh, that's
probably
okay.
gonna-
Amy can help.
Here, Amy will have to help me.
Amy
but
can help,
yeah.
no problem.
Do we know what all students need to learn? Okay, and then what do we do if they do know everything they do need to learn? You know, how do we respond in that case? How do we respond if they don't know what they need to learn? I don't know what's the one.
We got the assessment one, so.
Oh, so first identify what they need to know, then we need to assess whether or not they know it, and then based on whether or not they need to know, we need to intervene in one way, shape, or form. So we need to either advance them if they already know it, what do we do when they know it, and then what do we do if they don't know it? And that's our triangle, right? So when we look at the triangle, whether it's behavior, academics, those are then the supports we build in either of those cases and try to do that with. And so you'll hear us talk a lot about MTSS or action plans around that, whether it's a secondary advisory time, whether it's a literacy circle, you know, at an elementary school where they pull out. But those are all part of a larger framework, and it really starts with having confidence in knowing what the students should know and be able to do at whatever level they're at. So I don't know, Ed, stuff on MTSS before we go on to the next
So
piece?
the green part of the triangle, that's universal, that's all instruction for all, and we should be, by all accounts, meeting the needs of about 80% of the students just with our core instruction, whether that's in the behavior side of the triangle or the academic side of the triangle. Then for that yellow part, that's roughly 5 to 15% of our population should fall out in there. So they're struggling somewhat, and we're going to intervene above and beyond what they get in core instruction. After that, there's about 5% at the tippy top of the MTSS triangle that might be struggling even if you've offered those tier 2 supports. So how do you increase that? That might mean more time, that might mean smaller group size, that might mean changing up the curriculum or the support that you're delivering. So we keep track both academically and behaviorally how our students are progressing through the system. And we know if our buildings are healthy, as indicated by if their students are falling out in that triangle like that. And then if not, we are talking to them about if you're not 80% proficient, what might you need to be doing in your core instruction time to bump that back up. So the other thing, through differentiated accountability work in universal instruction, if only 60% of your kids are proficient, you want to insert a class-wide intervention. That's not part of that yellow triangle. That's just what we need to do in core. So we really pay close attention to how our kids are performing. So, of course, at each building, our percentages look somewhat different. And that's constant conversations that we're
And
having.
maybe to add, that's an active part of the discussion now. So if you are at a building and you're in one of those student support team meetings, that's what they're talking about. They're looking at that data and they're saying, is our core instruction working? Are the tier 2 interventions working? Are the tier 3 interventions working? Do we have the right kids in tier 2 and tier 3 intervention, and are they making progress? And that's a group discussion. It's not left to an individual teacher to try to figure that out on their own. So that also is very different than where we were in the past.
Can I ask a couple questions? So what do we know, what are the students learning? I mean, what are our goals for them? Are those based on standards? What kind of standards? How granular they get it?
So that's really the work, yeah, is you take the core curriculum, the standards identified for you, and then that's the work that our curriculum teams do, is to try to identify what are those essential learnings or understandings. You hear a lot of different names used for them that are taught in each of those classes, and then how do we have any confidence, that's that second step of the process, working through that they actually know. So I'm teaching it, are they learning it, right? How do we know if they're actually learning what we've identified as important for them to do, and that's based off the core.
And then how often do you do this sort of assessment of, you're not just doing it on the annual, I would test the basic skills or FAST or whatever, I mean, you're doing it in real time, just curious about
So at
frequency.
the elementary level, we give these universal screening assessments 3 times a year. So now it's FAST, reading and fast math. We're implementing fast math for the first time this year at the elementary level.
And I'm thinking about you heard me say, you're going to be tired of me saying Dorothy, but my mother-in-law Dorothy, I'm double checking. If I heard you right, Amy and Matt, in the green, you're saying ideally or typically about 80% of the kids should be making it from the learning diet, reading, math diet that they're getting in regular class. Is that right?
Yes.
And if it falls below 80% of our kids there, then there would be some things I can be doing as a classroom teacher to tackle that. And then for the other 20% of the kids, right, in the yellow and red, they need additional support.
Absolutely, in
that-
addition to core. Yep.
Okay.
So I understand the academic side. So on the behavioral side, how do you come up with your core, your green piece? And I probably understand that better at the elementary level, because Kirkwood Eagles soar. And, but, right, because
Yeah.
PBIS is in all of our elementary buildings, and that's, the curriculum is SOAR, or whatever it is for
Yeah.
everybody. What is it at secondary level?
Well, Southeast Little Hawks also soar. So that's part of the work, right? Is that we don't have PBS consistently at every secondary building, but we do have ways we teach behavioral expectations. And is PBS something that we're talking about that maybe we need to expand to all of them? Yes, I think that's the conversation we're in right now. I think our junior highs all do it in some way, shape, or form. Liberty High's had a really concentrated effort to start PBS this year, and then Weston City, we're trying to figure out what's the best way to make sure we leverage that with staff support. But just like the academic side, there's a core instruction piece that happens with our behavior, whether we do that very explicitly and intentional, or not very explicitly and unintentional. Then our core is not very good, and then we end up with some of the results we don't want. So it's really the same process, just looking at how are we intentional about teaching behavior expectations and what we want on that end. And there's just different challenges that maybe go along with the behavior side in comparison with some of the academic pieces. But I think that is part of secondary. We know that if we don't want to keep seeing suspension results like we have them, or some of the referral numbers like we have them, then we have a responsibility to do something different on our core instruction on behavior too.
I suppose we'll get to that in where we're at.
Well, and probably one of probably the best example in terms of explicit work on that is at Tate. They've been very, very explicit about it, and that's why I got you, they've got some really nice large posters that they've gone through and done, which are to help students and staff understand where these pieces are, what's the universal piece, what will be our expectation for you if we've got to do a tier 1 or a tier 2 intervention. If you talk to their team, if you're in there, they'll tell you that they probably need to be far more explicit about that than it might be at City or West, just because of some of the precedent behaviors that some of the students bring with them. And so they're very intentional about how they do that.
And so the behavior standards, ones that we do have, they cover things like persistence and sort of cross-cutting skills, or I'm just trying to get a flavor of what those behavioral core skills are.
I mean, I know what I do, and it's all based on emotional intelligence and self-awareness, self-control, self-monitoring, that kind of stuff. And it seems to be from
That's what I was going to
that.
talk a lot more about, was the self-regulation component too.
Yeah.
Really, it's about a lot of the work spent into breaking them into when a little bit of we want to proactively teach what the behavior should look like, right, in these different spaces or in the classroom or different situations that they're presented with. And then when things don't go right, what's a minor error where it didn't go right, what's a major error where it didn't go right, and then how do we handle those minors and majors differently. But I think the important part of it is that first we have to make sure we're teaching what it should look like to them, right, and doing that, and that's where we need to continue to get better.
And then on the flip side, on the staff side, what are appropriate responses to the behaviors? What does that need to look like?
A lot of PBIS is adult reinforcement for adults, reinforcing the appropriate positive behavior for kids. Not always running around saying no, but recognizing, here you're sitting, appropriately and paying attention. And what you see a lot with when you're talking about the elementary programs, it's a little bit more explicit. And Matt could chime in. A lot of our secondary teachers will say that feels like first grade stuff to me. I don't want to be saying that kind of stuff to my secondary students. But there are, and the folks at Tate will tell you, it makes a big difference when you do.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference when you do.
Yeah, I think there's a better realization of that. I mean, I think if you talk to our junior high principals, at least my experience as a junior high principal was we'd walk all the kids down the lunchroom and say, this is how you go through the lunchroom. We would do a lesson in study hall. This is how you do study hall, you know, and those types of things. And so there's a way to, I think, make it appropriate for their age and make it seem relevant to what they're doing, you know, in comparison to, you know, maybe the way that some of those things were taught at elementary school. So again, I think it's a contextual thing. I think there's a community component to when PBS was, you know, started to be talked about in Iowa City here, and that's kind of influenced some of our high school conversations a little bit about maybe even some resistance from staff members at times, you know, about what does that mean, and did it get labeled as just handing out tickets? Well,
Yeah,
that's
I
the
think
thing,
that
you know,
actually-
that's the part we try to work through, is to say, well, it's bigger than that, right? Let's talk about what are common expectations and how do we teach those first. So that's kind of the behavior side of it. Another, I guess, just kind of transition down to another document there to show you, is one we used with the last board. So Lori and Phil are probably familiar with this, and Paul as well. When you look at being intentional in the different subgroups that are struggling, when we look at those things, and what are the intentional pieces we have in place for those. So when we look at our achievement data and know that we're not as successful in areas of special education, English language learners, free and reduced lunch, or poverty students, and then cultural and equity to try to address racial achievement gaps and ethnic achievement gaps. You know, those are very specified, targeted approaches to try to address those things, and we try to categorize them based on those different pieces. And of course, some of those things work in concert. You know, they don't all work in isolation, that they might touch multiple groups. The top part of that diagram in the bottom right-hand corner there is the one I'm referring to. The top part of that runs all the way across were just really improvements we saw for all kids. It should, Harry's example of raising all kids, right? That we're not just targeting certain subgroups, we're also trying to do some things for all to raise the whole group while being intentional for the groups we know are also not achieving at the rates we want to. So those are things like Amy's, Eli, when she talks about early literacy implementation at the elementary school, we talk about the MTSS structure we just walked through, increased instructional time to our elementary student day that was added overall in 15-16. So we're just starting to see some of the effects of that. Summer school prep secondary, we really rethought the way we do summer school. Instead of it being a punitive measure where we pull kids in and make them do credit recovery, said, well, let's kind of flip it on its head and do a boost model, right? We're going to try to help you be more successful at the next level you're going to, instead of, you know, you have to do this to advance type of thing. So those are things we put in place really for all kids to run all the way across and rethink our approaches, and then those pieces broken into the 4 are targeted at those different groups. You see that there?
So just a quick comment about, I'm thinking back to when Lori and Ruthina and Steve and I did the planning call last week for tonight. And one of the things that popped up was, so, you know, what are the measurables related to goals, and at what point what's our role as a board related to that work, and what does that look like, that kind of that realm? I think in most districts, where that's at is probably nested in the action plan, the strategic planning, where the rubber hits the road level that staff's leading, and it becomes figuring out which of those pieces of data would be most helpful, or multiple pieces of data for you as a board to periodically get reports on, and where it doesn't just feel like it's one more report. If it's really red flagged, it's a big deal, right? I'm not saying you have or haven't done this, in general, across the state. And it links into closing the achievement gap where all kids are ready. You flag those big pieces of data, and you're looking at what's the big picture when we look at those data that are emerging from our own goals, our own strategic plan. What's the big picture pattern there in terms of, as a piece of monitoring at the board level, knowing that Amy, Matt, principals, teachers are way down in the weeds on all the specifics, but still, what's the big picture movement? Where are we flat? Where are we making the kind of headway? Where do we not even have good data yet? Or we don't have it consistently yet? And just understanding what the big picture on that is. And I often will say to district administrators, boards will say, so how we don't know which data those are. Say to the administrative team, which ones are the pieces you guys and principals and teachers are watching most closely? What's most meaningful? Which pieces of data give you the best sense of what's happening? And that's the data share with the board. It's not inventing something different. It just may be looking at it at the aggregate level, a level up or two, where you're not looking at what Wally's data looks like, or the third grade class at Tate, but rather what's the picture across that building, what's the picture across all the secondary buildings, that kind of thing. Make
Well,
sense?
it's easy to hold us accountable for the outcome data, right? The numbers you see at the end. But I think the piece that we also feel accountable to is progress towards those outcomes,
Absolutely.
right? And so when we talk about all these steps in there, and if I tell you, well, you know, Amy can talk through fast and early literacy implementation in elementary, but our work at the secondary is about around common formative assessments to make sure we have some confidence again in being able to assess the things kids know or don't know. I would expect you to say, well, if that's the work, then when can we expect completion of that work, right? If that's the driver to have the effect change we want to see in those numbers, then that's the important step, right? Instead of just focused on those numbers at the end and demanding, you know, results there, because we all want to see the results there, but it's how do we also hold each other accountable in the interim for the work that happens in between to get to those numbers?
And
That's-
what's that mean for along the way progress reports?
Right.
How often, Matt? Is that something twice a year, 3 times a year? So it doesn't become the once a year update on whatever are the critical pieces. Make sense? And some other stuff you may not be hearing about as regularly as often, but you have so many hours a month. And if you're gonna try to hear data on everything ever happening, then this was a nice, interesting activity, but it's not gonna go anywhere. It's what, just like narrowing the goals was a challenge before, for a board, it's narrowing which pieces of data are we gonna be hawks about and learn with. And it's not just, you didn't make that, you didn't make this. What's the progress, Matt? What's the progress, Amy? Where are we stuck? What can we do as a board to support you in getting over the hump? That's the kind of conversation will help this vision, and you'll move forward. And it won't be a gotcha. That's what we're after, if that makes sense, and it's not heresy, or I don't sound like a lunatic up here. I mean,
Okay, I'm gonna keep moving
Thank
around
you.
here, so I'm moving clockwise actually. So in the bottom left corner, this is something I'm super excited about, and.
And I can just interject just
Yep.
real quickly before you do that. So this is what we were doing at Lemmy today. We were saying, this is where the district is at, and then their next page, they peeled it back, here's where Lemmy is at. How do we look like the district? How do we look like, you know, where do we differ from the district? What are we doing?
So our school improvement plans were completely revamped over the course of the summer, and we have 4 major areas that we have asked ourselves as well as our buildings to concentrate on: reading, math, behavior, and school culture. So for each of those 4 areas, you're going to see a district goal, and I just provided you with a sample of our reading district goal. So you can see that we've got a SMART goal set, so something by specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So by the end of this year, we really are hoping that we're going to see a 3% growth in our FAST measures.
This is district-wide.
This is district-wide, we're aiming for that, okay? So that's that top goal. You kind of just scroll on down and you can see the places that we're entering data that we already have or new data that should be incoming. So this is a live document that we hope to be updated as well. And then right down there, we also have another equity SMART goal. And again, this is FAST information, so it's not Iowa assessment. And down here, we broke it out by the various subgroups, and we have set particular goal to double what we expected up above, so 6% specific to our Black and African American kiddos and our Hispanic and Latino kiddos, because they're the ones that are performing at the lowest. So both for reading and for math, we've set a 3% overall goal and then a 6% goal for our lowest performing subgroups. We've done the same thing for behavior, and we're monitoring suspensions. We've done the same thing for school culture, and we use that school climate survey that the ULI is producing, and we picked a couple of areas. You know, there's a lot of questions in there, but we've picked valuing diversity, and I think it's respecting differences. So this is just and the other thing that we did when you talk about alignment, this is really how we're truly trying to make those strategic plan goals come alive. When you talk about alignment there, so if we know as a district we want to see 3% growth by the end of the year for reading and math, we've asked our buildings to look at their individual data where they ended last year and to set theirs at least at 3%. So it doesn't mean you can't set it higher than that, but when you talk about having your arrows aligned, we're all pulling in the same direction. The trickier thing is when you get down to some of the smaller ends, when you drop down to those equity goals in each of those 4 areas. Sometimes a building doesn't have you know, an N of 10 to be able to set a goal like that. And what we've done, at least initially, because this is our first time through it, is say, still want you to have that goal there, even if you don't have the N, because potentially you have 1 or 2 kiddos that still fit in that subgroup. And then if not, if you're not able to set that, then in addition to that, make another equity goal that makes sense for your building population. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so you've got the district goal, 50% increase in weighting, and then at the building level, do you have building level goals, and they're putting certain actions in place to accomplish that? And that could be different based on the
Yes.
buildings and their different populations. Is
So-
that, it's not like a one size fits all.
Right, so you see how that SMART goal is written at the very end of that SMART goal where it says, all the way down, by focusing on core instruction and multi-tiered system of supports. There was a long line there to allow the buildings then to determine how they were gonna increase theirs 3%.
And maybe I'll just
Fill in the blank.
give you the Lemmy example from today. So they were looking at it and they were saying, okay, here's where my kids were in the spring of 17, my first graders. Now where are they in the fall of 17? And if there was a significant increase, why do we think that happened?
Yeah.
Or in 2 cases, there were 2 grade levels where there was a significant decrease. Now, Lemmy's a big enough school that statistically, you would think that you wouldn't see that because the N is large enough that it's not just a couple of kids that are struggling in a class. They were having a very deep discussion about rationale, understanding, looking at curriculum. We talked everything about spiraling in the math curriculum, present, not present in the new Envision math system. I mean, the depth of conversation at that meeting, at that staff meeting today, was incredibly deep in terms of diagnosis and then what's next. What are the steps that we take in order to address these concerns that we see in those numbers?
In their document, not only do they see this district language, but then there's a spot for their building language.
Mhm.
They have to fill in all their building data, and then there's a spot for an action plan. So then they have to get more specific on what those steps that they're going to take are to help increase their goal. If you're paying attention to what we've dropped in here with our fall FAST data, it looks really pleasing. The caveat or the caution I would give us is because of the transition to the new FAST Bridge system, the state had to allow us a couple of extra weeks, so that testing window was elongated, just because it wasn't up and running exactly correctly to begin with. So potentially, we've got a couple more weeks of instruction in there before we test kiddos. So we've got to be careful with being super excited about what we saw there. Of course, if we can sustain that, that's great because we're beating, you know,
I was
we're.
gonna say you set your goals too conservative.
Yes.
They actually talked about that today. That was one of the conversations that they had was, if we can close the achievement gap faster,
Yeah.
what does that look like?
So this makes me, so I'm just gonna say, when I looked at the strategic goals, my initial reaction to them was, they feel like treading water to me. I'm just saying it, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way, but they didn't feel aggressive. Just, we're gonna increase each year. Increase by how much? It could be 0.5 percentage point, that's nothing. The annual goals make me feel better, that you're putting in, you know, bigger documented improvement.
That's a good point, and to come back to the work that Harry did with us before, one of the things that he said was if you were going to set a 3 to 5 year goal, some of that granularity is going to have to happen with the annual pieces, and it can't be in the big piece.
Yeah, I understand. But so,
Yeah.
that alone, though, for me, didn't tell the whole picture of what we're trying to accomplish as a district. This now starts putting some light to how aggressively we want to try to tackle these.
Which is part of why
Yeah.
when Lori and Ruthina and Steve and I talked, we said, we gotta get some piece of the strategic plan in there because you peel back a couple layers and you start to see that there are measurables there. And then the conversation becomes, how robust are these, or that sort of thing, absolutely.
I think the thing to remember is, like Steve said, we just got to, I mean, it's not that we've just gotten in the car, but we've just started driving a little bit from the standpoint that we really want results, right? And I think we know the things and have some confidence in the things that will drive some results. But I can just go back a few years as being a building principal in this district and filling out the CSIP. We're just aligned on goals, right? I mean, so for us to deliver on those goals, I mean, and I know that's, you know, it can get discouraging or frustrating, but just the standpoint of just having them actually get some alignment to what we're all pointing the same direction, that those action plans are actually targeted on the same things rather than a building deciding, well, I want to work on this, so I'm going to build an action plan around this. Well, no, this is what, you know, you guys have said is our strategic plan and what's important. We need to have that work driving that way. So I think that does explain why it feels like treading water, why the district has treaded water on some things, because the work hasn't been targeted in the same direction. I can even give an example of our teacher quality plans with our teacher quality budget, you know, that when I see those things coming down and what teachers across the district are working on, there's alignment to the same goals. It's not, well, I think this is fun over, you know, here, or this is really interesting for social studies. Well, is it something that drives a district goal? Because I mean, those plans now come in around the same concepts, and so things all the way from professional development are actually targeted on the same pieces, which is, I think, a good thing for us.
At the risk of maybe alienating somebody, you're not going to get to A and B, those sort of things, without. You're not going to get to A and B without enough inertia and some things happening across the system. That's the challenge, without everybody not feeling like I'm a robot, and so that's just, you've got a challenge you got to work through.
It's an aligned framework. It's really-
You mentioned, and I'm the very one who said, let's keep this short, and it's good to ask
keep
questions.
asking questions.
No, and this will pay dividends for you the rest of this year and next year, slowing down and unpacking this some. My question is, you also mentioned something about the school culture climate survey? And what I wanted to ask is, I'm trying to connect the dots too. Does that get at,
Inclusion,
yeah, thank you. Thanks for putting that back. Is that going to help get at that?
Absolutely.
And then I also heard you say it's not data across every piece, but there's like, what I'm just going to use the words critical, or in your professional judgment, you've picked some pieces of data that are going to be most worthwhile as a system to dig into. Is that right? Monitor, whatever you want to call it. Is that right?
Yep.
And are those, were those sort of identified as maybe the largest areas of need for growth? The
Yeah.
most efficient in the climate survey?
Yeah, I really went to Kingsley and his team and said, you know, of all
What should
these
we
questions
focus
that
on?
we're asking.
Where are the red flags?
Okay.
Use Harry's or
And then for behavior, are we, and I don't want to get too in the weeds, but we're looking at probably decreasing.
Decreasing, yeah.
Mhm.
So we looked at suspensions, decreasing them by 5%.
Office referrals.
All that.
And 10%.
We've really continued to try to target that defiance and disrespect, because that's the one we feel is the most subjective in how we
Right.
handle that and the consequences either
Yes.
given or what's decided to be sent to the office
Yep.
and dealt with by the principal. So that's really a target area in that. And then when you talked about that last one, JP, those, the climate one, I was just going to try to read it here to you. But yeah, we relied on Kingsley to say, okay, what are the ones here we should work on in that climate? There it is.
So the Dorothy.
Values diversity and students respect differences. And so we really tried to target those two things, the value diversity and respecting differences. And then what are the things like implicit bias training, things we have going on with the staff for that should help us see a change in those numbers and how students are experiencing school.
What were those two areas again? The value, diversity, and...
Respecting differences and value diversity.
So in the 2 sentences or less, board members, what would I tell Dorothy? She'd say, who's Kingsley? What does that mean? What would you tell her in 2-3 sentences? This is why Iowa City's focused, this is the thinking behind why they chose to focus maybe more heavily on some parts of this culture climate data.
And before you do that, just a
Yep.
quick apology. I think I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Kingsley is at a city council meeting today because that was moved because elections are tomorrow. So he apologizes that he's not here, but he's in their formal meeting right now. So.
And all I did is just draw attention to that. So.
No, that's all right. I was supposed to tell him where he was, and I forgot to do that. here, so.
What would you tell as a board member? What would you tell a neighbor who said, who's Kingsley and what does that mean? Just in a couple, 3 sentences, what would you say? What's that mean?
Do I want the neighbor to like me after that? I mean, I think, you know, part of it, for some people, really, you have to unpack that there's a problem in the district.
Okay.
There are people who don't understand that this is a problem and what's the big deal.
Okay.
And so I think saying, Iowa City specifically, we view ourselves as a very progressive place, but clearly the experience of minority students and LGBTQ, but this is, are we focusing minority or are we?
So we have both a broad goal and a
All.
specific goal.
Okay, so just that it's not the case. That
So
from the student's perspective, they are not always respected or they do not feel included. Therefore, we're focusing on that.
Uh-huh.
as
So we're intentional. We selected areas that, whatever, have
red flags.
great red flags, great need for improvement, whatever kind of language you want to use. Is that right? Make sense? So it's not just, because sometimes, sorry, bear with me, sometimes what I'll watch is board may come on new and be suspicious about, why aren't we seeing that area reading data or that area behavior data? Again, if you want to spend 20 more hours a year at the board table, maybe you go deeper in other stuff, but at some point, it's like focus, goals. What are we going to focus most heavily on? It's the areas that our track record, the red flags show us we can't afford not to be paying attention to these areas. That's why that data is getting profiled, right? That's why you're watching that in particular, which is good for you guys.
Part of
And we
our
see
third board
significant
goal.
opportunities for
Part of your what?
It's part of our third district goal.
Yeah?
But
Yeah,
we
cool.
see significant opportunities for improvement. You know, Matt talked about the defiance and disrespect piece, and they told me to move to the next slide, but let me just pop back for just a minute. What's that tier 1 piece? So what are our expectations in the classroom for staff so that there's an opportunity for them to deal with that in that 80% realm? Rather than, oh, Matt's disrespectful, I'm gonna send him to the office. Well, what's my job in the classroom? So we saw that as a real area of opportunity for us, which could have some really significant impact from a ripple effect on other areas inside that survey.
Yeah, that tier is, what does respect look like?
The reason I put this slide in here was that previous slide had those 3 graphics on it, and I think this just does a nice job of showing you how these initiatives all tie together. So ELI, early literacy, and then all the way to the right, differentiated accountability, those are state of Iowa initiatives. Multi-tiered system of support, you can go anywhere in the nation and find that described there. So the blue wall talks about what kind of assessments are we're giving kiddos. So universal screening 3 times a year, you can see across that whole spectrum. Progress monitoring, so for students that are not proficient or not making it with behavior, we are monitoring them. Could be weekly, could be monthly, could be every other week, depending on which topic or area that you're in. So, and it all goes down to database decision making, right? We're going to put some supports in place, not based on a hunch, but based on what our data is actually telling us. All 3 of these initiatives talk about an intervention system. So what are those things that you're providing as a way of tier 2 supports and tier 3 supports on both the academic side as well as the behavior side? And then specific to multi-tiered system of supports, you go back and what is that evidence within universal instruction? So again, if not 80% of your kiddos aren't making it, then we also need to change something about core instruction. That also works its way over to differentiated accountability. And then there's that leadership component. So that differentiated accountability side, which is that atomic flower that you would have seen up above, these 5 areas, have you go back down, Steve, are what the state is looking at for their new site visit process. So in the past, every 5 years, each district in Iowa was evaluated. People came in, did a bunch of interviews, and on the side would do audits of your various documents, your school calendar, different policies that you were supposed to have in place. That is all completely wiped clean. There is still a document audit per se. We do that through just sending that to the educational portal to the state. And then the way that the state is supporting us depends on how you're kind of falling out with these healthy indicators. And right now, they only have a way to monitor the blue and the red area. And that was information pulled out of Iowa Tier in the past. It will be pulled out of FAST. And so what does your K-6 proficiency rates look like? And then at one point, or the last couple of years, they've been able to tell us what % of your kiddos were screened, so 3 times a year, and then what % of your kids that were not proficient are being progress monitored. And of course, we've got goals for where we need to be with each of those, right? You should say 100% of our kids are screened. Well, we're not screening our kids that are on all assessments in special education. There's a few, kiddos that don't necessarily fit with this, so we're not going to necessarily see 100%. So the state sets it at something like 95%. Where do they want us to be? Now, with those 2 areas that I talked about that they're looking at, and they call them their healthy indicators, then as a district, they went back and they looked at the system as, guess what, an MTSS triangle. So they said, we want 80% of the buildings in the state of Iowa falling out at whatever, 80% proficient and above. We want this % of schools falling out in that middle tier, and we can provide this level of support. And then for these schools that are really not making it, we're going to provide this intensive support. Well, I think the first year that they rolled it out last year, they realized that triangle, that 80-15-5 did not look like it should in the state of Iowa. So how can we deliver?
Buildings or districts?
Huh?
Buildings or districts?
Buildings.
Buildings.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
And even, I'm sorry, districts, no, because we saw the number by district, by the 333. And so what the state did then, instead, if you weren't hitting your 80% or above, instead of giving real intensive supports to districts like they thought that they might be able to deliver on, essentially, they started these differentiated accountability trainings for school districts to attend. And so we sent,
They need to go back to the core instruction.
yeah. So there are 6 building blocks within that we're taking a look at when our buildings are non-proficient. So I'm getting way deep into the weeds, but I think it's important for you to understand that the state is putting a lot of effort behind differentiated accountability and providing supports back to school districts. And in fact, on Thursday and Friday of this week, I'm taking a bunch of elementary principals to the universal instruction training that the DA is offering. For those that can't go, hopefully they're going to go on the 20th and 21st this month. So there's a series of trainings offered.
And is this is mostly elementary? Because
Yes,
you don't
it's a
have
case-
progress monitoring in high
right.
school unless the kid's in special.
This is a K-6, so over to Eli, that's K-3.
Okay.
MTSS should be across the board. And then assessment and the differentiated accountability piece, right now the state is really targeting K-6 literacy.
Yeah.
They intend to take it K-12 literacy, K-12 math, K-12 behavior. They're just not there yet.
Sure.
All right.
Is this set by ESSA? Is that?
So that's going to be the next, hopefully, slide that I can bring to you soon to show how ESSA, which components, we'll have a 4th column in there to show how, where there's that overlap and what's unique to ESSA. I actually sit on a team, it's called C4K. We meet once a month, and this is the first year they've invited LEA reps to come, so typically it's been AEA and DE personnel trying to push out this. But this slide actually comes from the work that we've been doing, because they're working hard at the state level to try to show how these initiatives are not out here just separate on their own, how they work together. And so, as we've been promised that the ESSA column will sit there as soon as it gets rolled out officially. And that's still
Kind of
sitting
nice
with
if it
the
aligned.
Yes.
Didn't have to-
Yes.
Really nice.
Do everything, absolutely.
And
Okay,
that's the
so-
double A size A letter, right?
All right, so I think we made it to reading math.
Oops. So culture, we obviously talked about all 3 goals, or introduced all 3 of those at the beginning, but the last goals there to improve that educational experience for all children through those culturally inclusive and responsive school environments. And then that's, there's several parts there. Steve, if you go to the next one, there's 4 objectives in our comprehensive equity plan that's on the website. And so obviously that's a tiny little piece for you there, but I thought the important thing was to know that there's the 4 big pieces to it. And then if you go to the final slide, Steve, we tried to capture some of the things that are in place to support that. And while I think we have some struggles in what our data shows, I think I'm confident when I go to other school districts to say the amount of equity and culture work we have going on, I would put up against anybody. I really do think we have a ton of things in place, and so it's not, do we need to do something else? It's that we need to really hone in on these and focus and get really good at these things that we have going, because I don't think you'd see this kind of work in this kind of scale going on in some other districts in the state. And so teams that we have, Multicultural Gender Fair Committee, Equity Committee, Cultural Competency Team, LGBTQ Task Force, and Immigrant Advisory Board. Those are all networks of groups that Kingsley works with, either directly or indirectly. Actions underway. We have implicit bias professional development all the way from what our ESC team does down to building leadership teams doing that work in a 3-year implementation plan to try to roll that out district-wide. We've talked to you before about AVID and some of the work going on there. Equal Opportunity Schools is maybe when we were in our small group, we talked about where do we have access gaps as well as not just achievement gaps or opportunity gaps. Opportunity gaps and access gaps are a realization for us. So that addresses one in their very area of advanced placement. I know we have different opinions about good, bad, or otherwise, but that is a reality of a program we have for us that has an access gap. And so where do we identify those access gaps and try to target those? And that's an example of that work. Another one that Kingsley had mentioned was administrative guidelines defining the process for addressing ICE requests. That was a piece that, to culturally inclusive environment, making sure that, a section of our community feels like that they're going to be treated fairly and have support in the district. So that was a process he worked through with you guys. And then assessments and measurements, and you know, we typically have the Iowa Youth Survey, or you know, districts in the state have access to that, but through his work, you know, we have that collaboration with the University of Iowa and feel like we have a lot more informative pieces of data to help inform some of those plans that we talked to you about in that comprehensive school improvement plan. And so that's something I think we're gonna continue to administer, obviously continue to drive data from. The thing I think, at least I've said a couple times, and I think some other people acknowledge or wouldn't disagree with me, but if we really want to see a bump in some of our achievement numbers, some of those numbers have to change first, right? We have to have some of those things our kids feeling more confident, more comfortable, and more secure before we can expect, you know, to see some performance indicators change on the other end. And so those two, I think, have to work together if we want to see those increases.
Lori, is the last one the one you refer to as the culture or climate data?
The student survey.
Yeah, the student survey?
Yes.
That's the one where Kingsley's giving guidance and others, whatever, about the red flag areas?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just
And
to,
we have the public policy department at the University of Iowa doing a tremendous analysis for us twice a year?
Twice.
Twice a year. So we get just terrific data for that.
And they're coming out and working with each of the building teams as well as kind of the service to say, well, they'll come out and they'll help us process that data and come up with what those action plans are.
So when they
that
find
we can
things
add
that
to that too.
require deeper digging, then we're really fortunate because they bring a resource base to us that we otherwise couldn't afford. And so they can say, hey, the Iowa Youth Survey data says this, we think we need to dig deeper in your LGBTQIA group and see where they're at, so they'll drill down in there, whereas we wouldn't have the opportunity to do that, so it helps us better understand that context, so we can make those data-informed decisions.
just real quick, last year when I went to the IASB convention, the first session that I sat in on, that was small, well, it was a large, actually, room, bigger than this, and you sat at tables with, I don't know, 10 people, different districts, and it was about equity, and the whole presentation was about coming up with an equity statement, and it was really interesting. At the table I was at, nobody had an equity statement in their district but us. And so when we got to the point when we had to write our own, I said, well, we have one, and they were like, what? So I pulled it out, and like they looked at it, and they were just like, huh, you know, like, and so I think it's just good that, you know, we realized that we had an issue and tackled it, where it was kind of in the 9 other districts that were represented there, they had nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you're done, but sometimes it helps to get perspective on what you have accomplished in the next wave of work, so, yeah. You did great. I helped slow you down. The questions are great on the part of the board. Other additional comments or inquiries?
I'd like to see the goals, if I could, for the, so we've seen, okay, I don't know where my notes are, but we haven't seen the math goal, and I think you said it's still 3 and 6.
Yep.
But could we see the data for that too?
Sure.
And is this the first year that we're doing that assessment?
The AMAP, yes.
Yeah, so we don't have the past,
No,
yeah.
So we used what we just saw in our fall data, and 3% on that, so I think it was actually really down. About 65% of our kids were proficient in K-6, and we set the goal at 68.
So what's your annual goal setting process?
So we just worked through. So usually we come back in the fall with our building principals. That's one of our first meetings. We share out the comprehensive school improvement plan. They begin to work with their leadership teams, and then they bring those goals back to Amy and I and submit those. And so, you know, part of it is we're asking them to be a little bit vulnerable too with their data, right?
Absolutely,
To challenge
yeah.
themselves. And, you know, I think in nationwide education, we've really struggled in a period of trying to do what the test shows. And I think what we need to have confidence in is that we know what the drivers should be, and then that we have to look for those numbers to change because we're focused on the drivers, not just focused on those numbers. And so that's, I think, the shift you're starting to see nationwide, not just in Iowa City either, is that, okay, we could keep staring at the numbers and hoping they're going to change, but if we don't really pay attention to the action plans and those steps and have confidence in those, we're never going to see the numbers on the page change. And they're kids, right? And that's who we're teaching, that's who we're working with, so we have to be committed to those steps. And so we can share the data with you, but I also want to protect our principals a little bit that are trying to work with their teams and be vulnerable and say, hey, this is the stretch goal for this is something we want to work with, and we're committed to it. And, you know, in some way, we don't want people pointing the finger to us and say, hey, you only got to 2% instead of 3, or 2% instead of 4.
Or throwing one school under the bus.
Yeah,
might be
that maybe wasn't as successful, right? 'Cause
Well,
that should be part of it
So
too.
your building's
Yeah.
20 points behind.
Or remember that some of our buildings are small, and so if you have some challenging issues at a grade level, you can see that manifesting itself as it walks through. And not only do we not want to throw the school under the bus, but we also want to make sure we don't throw the kids under the bus.
It's a district-wide
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah.
But, which is why it's helpful for us to see
Yeah.
the data, because I think we all understand that
Mhm.
it's, not their
Yep.
fault, but we
Right.
clearly need to give them more resources, or we need to change something. We can't continue to keep doing it the same way if
Yep.
they're 20 points behind this other school over here.
Yep.
If we're gonna change that gap, we have to do something.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? If we can identify this worked here, that's where I was saying earlier about holding us accountable to the process. Well, if you know common informative assessments or that, this strategy works, then, what's that step to say we should be replicating that in other places? But sometimes we obviously know in schools it's just not that clean to point to one thing either, right? What was that thing that caused the change that you saw? Can we narrow that down to say it was this variable? Maybe we can, maybe we can't. But I think when we do have those evidences of success, that is our job to figure out, well, if it works here, I want it to work as many places as possible.
And I think, my experience has been, it's not as often whatever plan or program you have, it's just relationships. And a kid's gonna work for a teacher that they have a good relationship with, which is when we go to that climate survey, and if we can do genuine things that change that relationship, I think, and I do believe we probably have buildings where it's just harder to form those positive relationships. It's just, my daughter goes to Kirkwood, so I know that sometimes there are huge challenges that it's gonna be hard to fix with curriculum or more staff even.
Yeah.
Ram's great, but at some point, it's
It's a bigger
oh my.
issue than just throwing, or not throwing, but offering up more
More resources.
resources. Because eventually we have to look at, not necessarily to blame the student population, but the student population, because if you have certain schools that have more of these challenging issues, they're not able to actually go in and do the teaching to get to the achievement level because of those issues. And I'm just thinking of
Stuff
sitting
we've
in.
been hearing.
Well, yeah, Twain. That's when you look at their population, they're there to serve a very different population than, say, Lucas. So their goals and their achievement will be totally different because the situation that's being presented is totally different. So, I can respect wanting to protect the.
So just think about how many things they have to be good at, right? Like
Yeah.
you go back to that chart that had the 4 different ones. If you're a school that has a high volume of any of, or one of those things, or if you're a school that has a high volume of all 4 of those things, all the different things we have listed there, we're asking them to become very good at SIOP for ELL. We're asking them to be very culturally responsive because they may have a diverse school makeup. They may have a school then but high into poverty, that creates some other challenges or relationships the teacher has to address in their classroom. So we're asking them to do a lot of different things when they have a school of that makeup, right? And it's not that it's impossible, but it's different. Right?
Well, the buildings are gonna find themselves as the same spot 2-3 years ago you are as a district. If they're gonna try to concentrate on more than 2 or 3 things and really go at it whole hog, the chances are it's watered down and they're probably not gonna get a lot of anything done.
Right.
As hard as that is to say, you get headwind and some momentum around a couple of areas, and then you grow this thing out. But the likelihood of hitting 5 or 6 things, it doesn't mean you write it off, but they're not gonna be able to give equal energy.
They all have the same amount of time in the day.
Yeah, that's right.
That's why I think it's been important for us to put those 4 areas in front of them. The other thing that I think is unique, and I've had some building principals in the past want to consider theirs a living doc, but theirs truly is a living document because there's so many placeholders in their building CSIPs where they're expected to put their latest piece of data. The other thing I just want you to thinking about too, so as we think about what the buildings are doing in the way of action plans, we too are looking back at ourselves, saying how are we supporting the work, right? And so what kinds of trainings are we offering? And then from there, who's attended it, right? So maybe your building's struggling. I wish we had a system that would show us how many people at a particular building have received training. We've got staff turnover and things like that, true. So is it really, we're not offering the right programs, or is it we're not trainings? or are we not taking advantage of it? And then from there, what's the implementation plan back in the building, right? And then how are we holding teachers accountable once they've been trained and the implementation plan is out? So we're investing in a lot of different things like letters program, letters training, 95% group, PBIS, behavior basics. We can kind of go down the list. So it's hard to say, I mean, on both sides. When we're seeing improvement, what is it related to? Because we have so many initiatives that we're hoping to support them. And on the flip side, if it's not working for another building, have they truly taken advantage of that? So,
So what's staff saying? What's the feedback? What's the blowback? Where are we at with that? I mean, because this is a lot of change, and it's happened quickly. And if I know anything about a lot of educators, that's not always super tough.
So I wonder first about our leadership, right? I wonder first about our principals. And we have some principals in-house now that are directors that are formerly principals. And so we just said simply react to this. You know, should we have their building goals still allow them to pick what assessment they were going to look at and still set their percentage? But we just came to agreement that buildings are hungry for this, they're going to appreciate it. And I personally have had no pushback from the principal group at all. In fact, I've had a couple of principals out loud amongst their peers thank us for just making it very clear on what our expectations, or where we're headed, where we hope to be, right?
So how about their staff?
I haven't gotten any pushback from, I mean, I haven't heard that there's been pushback.
So I go sit through staff meetings as a staff member, so I'm not on the agenda. I'm just there at a table. I was working at Lemmy. I've been out at Longfellow as they were in this part of the process. So I like to go to those meetings at this time of the year. What I can tell you is that what you see at the staff meeting is very action-oriented. So there's a clear-cut understanding of, given the data, here's where we are. Given the goals, here's where we know we're expected to be. Where are our opportunities to move from here to there? Where are our challenges to move from here to there? So a lot of small group table work, a lot of very explicit conversation, sometimes frustration, because that can be, again, as Amy said, you're looking at it, here's the district, here's our building, and here's our overall building goal. Now here's our disaggregated goal down here. Some of that frustration today might have been what happened between last spring's second graders and this fall's third graders. How can there be that much of a drop off in achievement on this assessment? And now we know that where that's at. We have 2 more opportunities to address that. What do we do? But it's not. It's very focused. The conversation is very directional. It's not fuzzy, warm, soft. It's very hard.
Is it along the planning cycle though? I mean, because you're starting your goal planning when they come back in the fall, and budgets are set for the year, and you haven't got your first round of data. You get the first round of data, and they start setting the goals and the action plans for the building, and you're already 2-3 months into the school year. How much change can you really affect once you're already a quarter in? I mean, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of wondering, that's why I asked the question about when you do your goal setting, because I'm used to, here's your strategy, refine it, whatever, figure out what your priorities for the next year, then you do your budgeting based on your initiatives. And so, I was just, is it the right length of planning cycle? Maybe you need 2-year goals so that you've got some traction around.
It's kind of like a roundabout, right? You know, when do you enter and when do you exit?
Yeah.
One of the challenges that we're going to have coming up is that the new state assessment adoption process requires a spring administration and not a fall administration. So those of you with kids in the district know we've always done a fall administration. Now we're going to move to a spring administration. What is that going to mean for our data points as we go through there? So, you know, like I said, we had this conversation when I was at Longfellow. It's kind of like a roundabout, you know. So you're merging in, and at what point are you entering and at what point are you exiting? And some of that depends on where you get access to your data. And like the conversation today, it wasn't just about today's third graders. It was also about last year's second graders. And so, to your point, I think there's a much greater understanding of the continuum and not the isolation piece. You know, and it used to be I came to school in the fall, I got my new kids, I closed my door, I taught them for 180 days, I opened my door, I let them out, I went home, and I came back and started over again the next year. And there wasn't as much vertical or horizontal articulation, and there's far more of that today. So when the groups we were working at, today it wasn't just all third grade teachers. So we had a group of teachers in there, and there was a lot of conversation about why. What's the why behind this? And it wasn't just today's third grade teachers looking behind them and saying, well, somebody screwed up back there. It was this holistic discussion about what role does summer learning loss play in this? What's our mobility and stability ratios? How many of these kids are intact cohort analysis, right? How many of the kids in this year's third grade assessment were in last year's second grade assessment? So,
See, I know that happens at elementary buildings. I've seen that. I've seen how those teachers can drill down on reading score and really do some serious diagnostic stuff. I haven't seen it at secondary. I haven't seen that type of holistic approach. I have, and it'll be hard on reading and math maybe, but
Well, let me give you an example of, because you're right. I mean, the thing I think Steve's getting on there that we're trying to do is change the culture of what teaching looks like, right?
Yes.
And I mean, that's part of all of this. I mean, that's the fundamental shift you're making because, when you use the example of teach your 180 days and go home and, maybe the guy down the hall or lady down the hall did it differently. What we're really asking them to do is to collaborate as a team and to look at, okay, if I'm the Algebra 1 teacher at West High and I'm the Algebra 1 teacher at City High, and we have confidence in saying this is what our kids should know leaving Algebra 1, then when are we getting together saying, here's how my kids did on this subject, or on this part of the course, here's how my kids did on this part of the course. What can we learn from each other to do that better? So when I say things like identify those essential understandings, come up with common formative assessments, have a chance to have a conversation about improving our practice, we're just getting into that work, right? I mean, we're new into that work and into that conversation about being able to have that. And if, Chris, when he was here, oftentimes will ask, what do you need from us? One thing I think we've identified we need is we don't have a professional development structure that really fits that very well. So if I want to get teachers from across town to have that conversation, we're trying to either pull them out of their classroom and pay for sub days, because they can't do it in an hour Thursday to get together to do it. We're trying to leverage technology maybe to have some of those conversations, but those are deep, long conversations to have, in a sprawling district, across town, to say that my experience taking algebra at Liberty shouldn't look different than it does at City High School. And we should be able to learn from each other about how to improve our practice in that. And so those are the types of things that we're trying to do secondary. I think the best success we've had that I can talk through is last year we got our 3 junior high principals. The last 2 years we've got our 3 junior high principals in the room. We've got our curriculum coordinators and teachers in each of those junior highs together and said, okay, American Studies, what's important for Unit 1? What's important for Unit 2? And so it's not just dependent upon the teacher deciding what's important there. That we've said, we've done the core analysis to say this is the critical stuff that has to be taught. Now, you have your way of teaching it. She may have her way of teaching it. Then we'll look at our data at the end and see who was most successful, what we can learn from each other with that. Or obviously then we're going to get into, well, okay, how are the kids different? Were there differences? So that's the stuff I think we're trying to get to, and it's really back to that PLC framework that you're probably familiar with.
And part of the piece then is you take a session like tonight and say, you all have good memories. You come back and you're going to need to build on this. So when administration brings a recommendation, here's what we need how we need to reframe professional development. So remember last November when we talked about evenness across buildings? Well, now we're talking about for next year's calendar. Here's what it'll take, board. There's 3 ways you could do it. We're recommending this way. Here's why. Here are the things where you might hear some pushback from it, though. You can speculate. You can figure everybody isn't going to love it, right? But you can forecast that out ahead of time.
And there's a why behind it.
Yeah, and why we're doing it this way.
So you remember, as a district, we adopted Canvas. So one of the things we talked about today is there's a blueprint function in there that allows you to look at it and say, okay, American Studies, here's the common formative assessment. Here's where it's given in the course. Now you build the how. You're going to teach it differently than I do, but we're going to do this common formative assessment here. So now we got a data point that translates across all 3 junior high schools, all students taking the class. So it gives us that opportunity then in that PLC framework to have that conversation about where are we winning, where are we struggling, why, and it gets away from the isolation that we tend to see. And from the secondary structure, it's even harder to try to pull people together, whether it's departmentally or across the building as a whole. And so we've got to make sure we make the best use of every minute that we have of them.
So right now, a lot of that's happening in building, not across the district.
Yeah.
So back to Harry's example, we can end up with one building that really figures it out and does a great job, but then that work hasn't been shared to the other two high schools, right?
Yeah.
Maybe their department team in social studies figures it out, does a great job, and they're able to compare their assessments and learn from each other, but that learning hasn't been shared across. And so
Back
that's
to
why it's hard
alignment, how do we grow this out and align things so that the best of what we're learning?
Are we using teacher leaders to help do that and fill in, or building subs, or, I mean?
We struggle. We don't have enough bodies for it, which is why right now we actually have a study group that's with the ICEA to say, hey, this is the way we've always done it, kind of thing. We got this Thursday early out thing. Is this optimal for students and staff? Is this giving us the biggest rate of return on our investment? Or are there other alternatives that we could and should be looking at rather than letting kids out early on Thursday and trying to have teachers drive across the district for a 35-minute interaction, what's the value add on that?
Great.
So,
What's he stand for, sorry?
Sorry, professional learning community. It's really just talking about teacher teams. We even use that word maybe more frequently.
so now I'm going to draw on what I did a couple of years ago. No, this is good. Polling. But I want to ask this because I think we can help close the loop on a couple of things. So of these three big areas between the two sheets, the opportunities, the closing the gaps, the climate of inclusiveness out, not just kids, but out to and including parents, families, staff. From what you've heard over the last hour we've talked about as far as the strategic plan, goals and measures and assessments and data and information, which of those three areas do you find yourself saying, I heard it tonight pretty clearly, that the data and information in our strategic plan is focused on those areas? Where'd you hear it? Where did it play out? Okay? So data and efforts around this pretty clearly. You okay with that? All right, so I'm just going to put that there for a minute. Not done, you'll learn more things along the way. How about this area or this area, including the broader community? How about this one?
Well, it's definitely inclusion of students.
As I say,
Students.
specifically on the student side, a little less on the.
Maybe not on
Bigger
the
pictures.
broader side, right?
Yeah, parents.
The broader
community.
side.
And unfortunately, when we were talking about the elementary level and everything, and we're talking about the one person that has vertical integration with the student is the parent.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't recognize getting that parent really energized in the elementary level, which hopefully then it carries on through, all the things we're talking about, trying to, do this, do that, I think we're missing.
How do we hook them into this stuff? Planning,
Right,
life plan, what are
exactly, because they have a student during the summer, when there is that drop-off. They have them during break. They have them all the time. And they have them all the way through from kindergarten to high school. And how, I think that's the part of the puzzle that we're really not working on to bring in, because look at the high achieving elementary schools and the parent participation in those. It's not a coincidence is that the high achieving schools have the high parent participation. It's a direct effect.
And then you can open the doorway and say, there may be some things in terms of family participation that you aren't able to penetrate to the degree you want, but there's a whole body of the larger community. What does that mean for connections with others in the community who can help with that? Now, I want to slide back for a second. This won't have helped you at all if I drive off tonight and the feeling it is, okay, starting next week, we need a goal on this and get it started the week after Thanksgiving. I mean, I don't even know what you already have happening around planning for kids. And that the week after Thanksgiving, we're going to cook up, and Steve and Matt and Amy, starting the first week in December, we're going to roll out this goal in that area either. We started with vision. It's a 10, 15-year piece, and I don't mean wait 12 years till you get after it. But I am saying one of the things you're going to have to figure out is if it's part of our vision, and we do see it as critical to moving forward, have the discussion, how soon and at what kind of entry points, or what do we already have going on in that area that we can build from? And when can we start to scale that work up? Does that make sense? Otherwise, you don't wait forever, but if the pressure is get this started in a month from now, then I've just driven off, and 2 years ago I preached 3 goals, keep it simple, and now I've helped to heap 2 or 3 more things on top. Make sense? So I don't have a direct answer. You're going to have to navigate that. But you've identified an area or an area and a half, right? Opportunities, and strengthening that engagement on a broader level, a goal and a half or an area and a half potentially from your vision. At some point you're going to have to wrestle with, but you can't. You guys have talked about sizable efforts tonight. And so you don't want to say, oh, hold on to all the reading work, forget the culture stuff for now, we're going to get going on these 2 new things and undo that. How you find a healthy balance to move forward.
I mean, I know what I'm taking away tonight is I've just learned a ton about the depth of where it's going and how recent that is. And so, I mean, if we've identified that, you know, we need to work on the including parents and community, I mean, that sounds to me like a conversation to continue having in this kind of setting. Because now I know at the board table, when you guys bring some of that to me, I'll have better questions to ask, it'll be more directed, it'll take a lot less time, I'll understand a lot more of the backstory. And then, you know, maybe some of the work we can do rather than you guys going over the 800 things and which ones we pull out is, oh, what are some ideas for things we can do as we monitor this and not pile more things on? Because this probably is a big piece, is parent engagement, community engagement, and there's a lot of big messy challenges there, and it's not going to be easy data stuff. But to me, maybe that's stuff the board can chew on.
That may be a
about.
piece of your entry point, is what's our contribution as a board? The other piece too, that it doesn't, and again, I don't know what you already have going on. My guess is you have some things happening, or your posture around this whole, you know, the multiple on-ramps and how do we reach kids. Everybody isn't gonna go to school to be an attorney or a nurse, but that have kids have passions in other areas. What do we already have going on in that realm? And what does that mean as we go forward the next 2-3 years for goals or priorities? It's going to kind of fit in that same bailiwick. But you got some legwork there ahead of you on those chunks, if that makes sense.
And I'd like to say on the community engagement, aren't there other entities that you're accountable to, like Title I with your community engagement to some degree?
Yes.
So it's not necessarily us writing the goal for you, but you're doing some of that work and being held accountable for it.
So it may be the learning, where do we already have some things happening
Sure, more
that are around those
Yeah,
areas?
this kind of conversation.
Absolutely. But I couldn't help myself from, don't want to leave the impression, 4 of you are brand new? Pardon me?
Just very new, yes.
Yeah, that they don't want to leave the impression, oh, we did this visioning thing, you know, November 29th, away we go on these pieces. But I also don't want you to mistake that as, well, all Harry's saying is we had this interesting conversation and he made excuses that we don't touch it for 5 years. I'm not saying that either, but somewhere in between that, that's really what I'm after. Is that fair?
Can I say one more thing about the parent thing?
Heck, yes.
Before we wrap it up. So one thing we look at are like, what are the things that have the largest effect size, right, to change student achievement, and what are those things we should be spending our time on? And I agree with, Phil completely that, parent involvement drives student achievement. We know that. So the only thing I'd ask you to think about when we engage in this work and when we continue to talk about this with you is, where do we think we can have our biggest impact to drive student achievement? Is that trying to increase the parent involvement, and that's where you want, when we go back and task our leaders with, is that what you want them trying to do? Do we want them focused on the 8 hours they have with students during the day? Because I think some of those are different challenges. And again, knowing we probably can't do everything, what are we going to really focus our time on that will drive student achievement? And if you tell us that you really want us doing parents, then guess what? Then we're going to go back and we're going to try our best to accomplish that goal and re-engage parents or engage them in a different way. But if we don't think that's necessarily the thing we can have the biggest impact on, then maybe there's other things we need to be focused on. So that parent piece is critically important, but I've also seen it in other places where you can spend all your energy trying to engage parents and you don't get the return on it, and then it doesn't lead to the results you want to see it. So just something to think about. Like I said, we'll do whatever you ask, but I just
What's
think
in
that's
your
an
sphere of
important thing to-
indirect
yeah.
influence as a district? And you're gonna get your biggest bang for the buck in terms of right where you actually touch kids. The other stuff's all important, but what can you influence as a district? It's where you touch kids, and then extend that out, family, et cetera. So, last thing to ask of you, I encourage you, a subsequent work session, and you kind of pick up and learn your way into what are we doing in Title I? What's this mean, other areas around already engagement? And it may be you take your next run at when the round of FAST data comes. Maybe that's at a board meeting, or maybe it's at a work session a time or two so you get really comfortable. It's hard to ask some questions when the TV camera's rolling. It's easier in a work session, and with the end goal, eventually you do work that into board meetings for transparency and accountability, but give yourself a little bit of opportunity to learn your way into this. You've been board members 2 months, right? Several of you. And the last thing that we didn't seal the deal on tonight, I don't have a great answer. We've got 4 areas in the vision. I'm not worried about the statement, but I'd ask you in a minute, just peek at the item with that I highlighted in yellow and ask yourself, that part 2 of your mission statement, does that sound like, or pieces of it sound like a vision, elements of a vision there? And you might say, we want to work from these 4 areas, Harry. I'm good. I'll dabble with some language and send it back to you. You can say, that's awful, or that's pretty good, Harry. Or I'll take first shot with a couple colleagues at our office, and then maybe send it to Lori, Ruthina, and Steve and say, you guys react, take it back to the whole board. It doesn't matter to me. I want you to have something concrete that we didn't spend all our time wordsmithing tonight. So, you want to work from the second part of your mission statement as vision, or would your preference be to try to work from these 4 areas in capturing a vision? Thoughts about that? It doesn't matter right or wrong. You own this language, I'll say that for you. And that may be what your plan is, but you want to flower up a language that sounds like the stuff in yellow, I'm not sure. Thoughts?
I think some of the big ideas are gonna be the tools that feed the vision.
Yep.
More so than the vision itself.
Uh-huh.
When I looked at the highlight part, I underlined the word challenged. That each student is challenged, and I just wrote results, and I wrote the pathway.
Yep.
Because I think that's what our vision is. What is the end game? What is the result we're trying to get?
Uh-huh.
And I don't think it's simply we're challenging students. I think it's challenge them to find what is that pathway to success and how to go about meeting that. Again, we're not going to wordsmith that all together, but I don't feel like we have to have a vision statement that has those 3 or 4 things all worded in there, because I think they're the ways to get there, not where you're trying to get.
Uh-huh.
I feel like the inclusion piece, though, needs to somehow, caring kind of gets at it.
Yeah, I was thinking too, culturally responsive,
Yeah.
empathetic, I don't know, but again.
That students feel safe and comfortable to learn or whatever, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Because how long have we had the mission statement?
We aren't real sure. Yeah.
And that's not unusual either, is it?
Oh, yeah.
So I would say then, if this has been our mission statement, a diverse staff, like, that's not.
That's
you know,
unhappening.
close. I mean, like, so then what is the value of this? If, and how much, we want to do that.
Well, keep in mind, as a mission statement, if you look at the bottom of our, I don't know what that is, 3-point font on the letterhead, this is all one sentence.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Because of course you can't have a 2-sentence statement, so there's literally a colon, and then it's, wrong page.
Yeah, I separated it out because it was.
This is a small t with a colon after community, so.
Okay.
So it needs some legwork. I don't have a good answer how you look to do that, but couple of it. I think these are the, kind of your pathway piece, but you'll have to play a little bit with the language. But it appears to me, you said earlier, we evolved to consensus around the big chunks. Cool, that's what you want. You can figure out the wording. And the goals will come next, what any subsequent goals over the next year or two that emerge from this. But the power is in, okay, what roadway are we on here? And you did coalesce pretty well around that. That's my take. And you got access to, there's a lot more data and goals and specifics in the strategic plan that relate to a couple of these areas than you would have known before. Good for you guys. Anybody have a benediction comment? I need like 2 minutes of feedback from you. This is my accountability step. What worked tonight, what did not work, that sort of thing. You can just fold the orange sheet in half and head out. My wife will say, how'd it go? And I'll say, it was fun to work with Iowa City again. Lori?
I have a question.
Yep.
So I've been on the board for 2 years now, and I have not seen these kinds of goals until tonight, or until they came out today. So this is great, thank you. Can we make it accessible to the community so they know what we're doing? So that it's like they see some actual steps towards what we say?
Yeah, we've talked about how to dashboard some of this stuff. So, oops, sorry.
Just need 2 more.
The orange sheet. And Amy and
Still
Matt,
hold up there.
you're welcome to
Yeah.
give me feedback to it. Helps me out here, so I appreciate it. Yeah, please.
So yes,
shake-
the answer is yes. We're trying to figure out how to dashboard some of it.
Thank the person on either side of you for their time and.
Conversation about the pros and cons around that, and just make sure you guys.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't have to be this detailed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could just be the goal. It wouldn't have to have all the outcomes. Thank you so much.
Well, even action steps, we've talked about how to put that together. So Kristen and I have actually been engaged in this dialogue for some time now about how to take that and how to make it community friendly, so that it's not all jargon and
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. We can just
Thank
email
you.
that stuff to
I
me.
will. I'll
Appreciate
do
it.
that tomorrow. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
And you said your card was in the folder, right?
It is,
Yes.
yeah.
Perfect. So I'll do that. I have that all typed out.
Ruthina, just as, because everyone's going to finish probably a little bit different, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you for doing this. I felt like this was the best conversation I've had with the board about teaching and learning since I've been here, and the best questions and the best chance to get into some of the work we're doing instead of just, you know, trying to defend numbers or explain numbers to you guys about what they are. So thanks for inviting us and having the opportunity to do that with you tonight. I think that was really good for us. I appreciate it.
Not to be a spoiler alert, but one of the things I have on here is a real positive thing is that I didn't feel like we rushed through just to try and get to the end. Like we took our time and explored each part as we went. You know, there's plenty of stuff on our agenda that is going to be on our next group, right?
We have how many more
But
work sessions?
I felt like we explored every part fully.
Good.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
See
See you tomorrow.
Bye, guys.
Well, some of you, right?
Some.
At Southeast.
December 1st is when the FFA is.
Yeah.
It's at Southeast, don't forget.
What is?
P&G.
Is it?
Yeah, because elections are
Yeah, we
here.
got elections here. Of course it is.
Oh, the last one.
Well, that's good. Otherwise, I'd have tried to get there at 5 to 6.
Tree would let us go down there.
I know I didn't, so.
Southeast tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, library.
Kim would have gotten me to the right place, I'm sure.
Park in the front.
Yep.
Thanks, Paul. I would have been late, that's what.
Well, I have been councils at West tomorrow because we got elections here, and I did not have that in my calendar until earlier today.
Excuse me, Sean.